Hey, everybody. Welcome to the fifth episode of Read Away. We will be discussing Chapter 5 of Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. But first
Wait,
things
what?
first.
The
Huh? What?
Dispossessed?
Yeah.
Is that?
You didn't know we were reading that?
Oh, oh, shoot, man! I've been working so hard on Game of Thrones. Oh man, no, I'm kidding. I haven't
What
read Game of Thrones.
what would ever possess you to even allow yourself to believe that you and I would do a read along series about Game of Thrones?
No, I don't. I, I was trying to come up with like the book that seemed the least likely. I figured Game of Thrones was a good contender.
It's up there. I mean, it's definitely on my list of books I have never for 1 second considered reading.
We'll think about it.
Now it's off the list.
There
I
you
thought
go.
about it. Shit.
For a whole second.
I
Actually,
did.
that might only have been a fraction of a second, so it still
I
might
did.
be on
I
that
couldn't.
list.
I'll have to watch this back and see if I can judge. Oh, okay. There's when the thought started.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
quite a second.
In the editing, the instant editing process that you do, in that the delay
Exactly.
between when we do it and when it goes like live.
Exactly. In the chat, some random geek says it's misogynistic and it's fantasy. Steve's out. Yeah. It's. I mean.
I like that he says that you're out and he puts misogynistic like even ahead of fantasy. That's pretty cool. Seriously, I'm gonna find you some fantasy that you'll enjoy.
I might be
I'm
able to
going to
tolerate
do
a
it,
certain
Steve.
amount of misogyny, but fantasy, I'm gone.
That's right out.
Happy New Year, first and foremost, to you, Dana,
So
and to
far,
everybody.
anyway.
Yeah.
Hey,
Hey,
how has your New Year been so far?
it's been really nice. I've writing a script for a video and editing a little bit of another video for you actually, and watched a little tiny bit of Mystery Science Theater. Watched a really interesting documentary about Walter Winchell earlier.
Oh, well, who is Walter Winchell?
You don't know who Walter Winchell was?
Well, I mean, I do, but our viewers might not.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know about Walter Winchell was arguably the most famous and influential newspaper columnist from the 1920s through the 1940s and 50s in the United States. And eventually he also became a radio star and sort of a TV star, although his TV show didn't really take off and never had nearly the impact that his radio show or his column had. And he was sort of the first like person to fuse entertainment and journalism and make a success at it, because his training wasn't in journalism. He was never educated as a journalist. His background was in vaudeville and in live performance. So he took those instincts and started writing a gossip column. And then as the gossip column became more popular, he started branching off into other kinds of more legitimate journalism. And he's just a really interesting guy, and had a really interesting sort of arc of a rise and fall where in the 30s and 40s, he spoke out against the Nazis and Hitler. And he was like this champion of civil rights. And then in the 50s, for some reason, he was seduced by like the anti-communism stuff, and he became an ally of Senator McCarthy, and that led to his downfall. So a really interesting and really like important figure in the history of media, and it was a really good documentary. So that's who Walter Winchell was in a nutshell.
Well, I'm so glad you enjoyed your documentary, Steve.
Thank you, Dana.
You're so welcome.
So, do you just in case a certain someone is watching, would you like to say?
Yes, actually, we have a friend who sometimes watches our live streams, not always, but sometimes. But today, January 1st, is her birthday. So happy birthday.
Yes, just in case you're watching.
Just in case.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
So, chapter 5 of the Dispossessed.
That's an interesting way of putting it.
You don't think I should call it that?
I won't say. I'm curious what possessed you.
Ah, A shitty sense of humor for the most part.
Fair enough. We've come to expect such things.
Thank you.
It's on brand.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
It is on brand, isn't it? Yeah, so I thought this was a really interesting chapter because it goes back to something that we have talked about a couple of times in some of the other chapters that we've looked at, which is it gives us an insight into how things work on Urus, because we've had chapters in the past that have given us insights into life and society on Anarish and their anarchist society, and now we get a little taste of how things are organized, and especially of sort of the political structure and some of the different nation states that exist on Urus, which I thought was really interesting, and also kind of plays into this. And we also get a little bit of a revelation as to, like, what is Shevik doing here? What brought him to this planet? Why did he want to come here? What are his goals? And why might they have invited him if these two worlds have been so separate for so long? So lots of things to chew on this chapter, lots of interesting stuff. So,
and it just kind of popped into my head right now that sometimes we get sort of down on science fiction for planets being like unilateral, or they're just one, less that it's just one people group, and more that it tends to be one just topography, one sort of geology. It's all the planet, like, Hoth is the ice planet and Tatooine is a desert and things like that. That's actually somewhat common. I think more so in movies than in books, because in books you can just be like, sky pirates, and then they're there, and then they decide to make a movie of your book, and you're Neil Gaiman, and you're just like, I'm so sorry, everybody who's working so hard. I just said sky pirates. I just made it up. And now they're like engineers and carpenters and like machinists, and they're working to build an airship for my sky pirates. Sorry, guys. He said that in an interview, and I'm just like, yeah, but I mean, they got a job because of you. He's a carpenter. What else is he going to do? He's going to build stuff. And you gave him, now he has a thing to build. And it's something cool, too. It's an airship for sky pirates. Anyway, exactly, Random Geek. Sky Pirates. But it just popped in my head that, that's Anaris is. It's just like one people group. It's just one. But there's an in-story reason for it. And then we see that on Urus, where, civilization has been around for a lot longer, that it has split up and developed over the centuries, and I guess even millennia. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Hey, Deralta Trekkie.
Hey, Deralta Trekkie.
And also, hi, everybody. And I hope you guys
hi, everybody. Not just
year so far.
Yeah.
So far.
We're less than a day in, but so far, at least for us, apparently, so far so good.
It could be worse.
Oh boy. Let's hopefully, hopefully that will not turn out to be the motto of this year as well.
Yeah. It could be worse, and it is what it is. Let's have reason for better mottos.
Yes, let's leave those mottos behind.
Please. Wow. Random Geek's been busting to read it.
Wow.
So
well, I guess we should probably talk about it then.
I like that he laughs at the administration when he organizes his classes the way that he's used to. And he's like, but why don't you expect students to be anarchists? And
I thought of you.
Because we sent all of the anarchists away.
they're on the moon.
They don't say that, but
I thought of you in those early paragraphs because he's dealing with he's a teacher, and we don't actually see him teaching all that much. I don't know if we actually see him teach at all, but we're told about his teaching, and it's the first that we've seen of that. Like, that's ostensibly the reason that he has come here, is to have sort of a residency at the university. And he said, or we're told that they didn't require him to teach, but he wanted to teach.
So, one thing that I don't think we see is why. Oh, thank you, some random geek. Everybody thinking about me as a teacher. What do you think made him want to teach?
Well, I think a lot of it is just we've seen established pretty emphatically that he has a lot of curiosity, and I think he's curious about the people, and he's curious about the students, and I think and he obviously has a lot of appreciation and enthusiasm for his chosen subject, and it's even mentioned in the text that he knows that a lot of the students who come to his class, especially initially, are there out of curiosity because he's the man from the moon, and are also there thinking maybe he'll be saying like some anarchist stuff in his lessons.
Dun, dun.
And he doesn't do that. He just teaches physics. And that is, I think part of that is he doesn't want to rock the boat too much. Like he doesn't, we find out later in the chapter that he is there partially with a political agenda, but he's also being smart about it. And he doesn't want to do anything or say anything that would be too threatening or too alienating to his hosts.
Well, yeah, he is there as a guest.
Yeah.
So, but also, I mean, he ain't stupid. He knows there's only one of him. And if they want to make him go away, it can happen.
Yeah. Oops, there was an accident. The factory he was touring blew up.
Lisa says isn't part of his desire to teach. That's how he was raised to believe that he could best,
serve society.
Society. That I think there's some of it, but I think also there's curiosity about what the student body is like. Like, what's it like to do the thing that he does here, as far as in comparison to when he was teaching on an RS.
I think that was a lot of it, because there are those bits in the chapter where he describes the difficulties that he has interacting with the students, where at first he tells, because the administrators tell him that he has to give them grades. Like he can't just teach them. He
can't just teach.
Yeah, he has to give them grades, and he doesn't really get that, but he's like, all right, fine. So everybody
gets an A.
Yeah, he basically goes to the students and he says, look, write me a paper about anything, any subject in the realm of physics that you find interesting, and as long as you do it, I'll give you an A, basically is what he says. And there are some of the students that don't like that. Like, they want him to instruct them and to impose more limitations on them and to actually evaluate their work.
I mean, that is his job, to instruct them. If he just says, okay, y'all are in physics, so do some physics and I'll give you an A. Like, that's like literally his job is actually to teach them. They're like, and so I didn't feel like that was like, I thought that was like, in addition to that's not what they wanted. It wasn't just that they wanted instruction. It was like, they wanted parameters. They want to know his expectations. They want a rubric. They want a checklist. They want directions for the assignment. What do we have to do to get the A's? Like, just like write a paper about physics and turn it in. It'll be an A.
But
no, it doesn't work that way. There has to be a checklist. I have to know how many, what I have to do. I need to know what the font size should be. I need to know how I'm going to get the A. And he's like, just turn a paper in.
Yeah.
They're like, that's too open-ended. And
he said that some of them preferred instead of thinking about the questions raised by the class, some of them preferred to simply be given the opportunity to write down what they had learned. And that was what, I guess that's how they had been taught to conceive of school, of education. That's what they felt education was, is that the teacher tells us stuff and then it comes test time and we write down the things that the teacher told us.
Things that we're supposed to have remembered from. Although I will say, in higher level physics, I found that a bit of a stretch. Exactly, Emerlion. I'm sorry. I'm seeing your name in print and I don't know how to pronounce it, or how you would prefer that. Anyway, but yeah, that's totally a thing. The quantification of teaching and education.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, and I was thinking about that as I was reading those early parts of the chapter, because it reminded me, and especially Shevik's reaction to it, coming from a world where that is not the way it's done. It reminded me of how, the that attempt to quantify has become in the minds of a lot of people, unfortunately, including usually the people who are setting education policy in this country. That has become the ultimate goal. Making the good grade is the goal, not learning the subject. I mean, in theory, the idea of a grade is just to have some indication that the students are learning the subject. But the learning is the most important thing. Are they actually learning the subject? Are they actually mastering the material?
the question is, are students learning?
Yeah.
Not
And
the question, is our students learning? Now, granted, was not a big fan of W, but that was not fair to him. I don't know if you remember the is our students learning thing. That was
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And it's but the way it is, the question is, comma, are students learning? And they put it was the RR homonym issue, and the fact that he's talking and without that closed captioning or something. Yeah. Anyway,
boy, remember when we thought he was the inarticulate president? Weren't those the days when we thought, oh, George W. Bush is the president who can't talk? Ha 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 ha. Oh, how little we knew.
Trump is inarticulate in a different way, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but also
it's
to
worse.
a far lesser extent. But yeah.
So, well, I want to pop over to the chat. There are a number of good, questions, and also a number of things that I've got video that I'm working on about. You talked about the people who set policy for education,
mm-hmm.
and their views on grading. Well, the people who set policy for education are either elected by us or appointed by those who are elected by us.
Ultimately, they're accountable to us.
Ultimately, it's us. We are, and our values. That's what shows up in how we do education. So, I mean, it's the parents and the members of the community who want to know who want to rank the kids. That's what they want to do. They want to rank the kids. So, Charles,
and that's what the kids want to do in this chapter. They want to rank themselves.
Yeah, and that's by the time they've gotten to university. And I will say, I see it in my high school students. You don't see it, you don't see it nearly as much in elementary school students. And there is a meme that comes around every so often, and it's from an interview with some science guy or other. I think it's a TED Talk. Anyway, he says, it's the British dude. The British guy says, Stephen.
That narrows it down.
Stephen, what's his name? Kind of round.
I don't know. I don't know.
I can see his face.
Can you draw it really quick?
Not really quick. I mean, it'll take me a couple of minutes. But yeah, British guy. I think he's a scientist. And he talks about that when you are talking to kids in the early years of schooling, they're curious about everything. They want to know, and why is it that way? What happens when this? They're full of questions, especially about science. By the time you get through public schooling, you don't have those questions. They don't have those questions. And I'm like, yeah. And like he says it as though this is a problem with education, which I would agree with him. and as though it's the issue is, the problem is the schools, which I disagree with. The reason the schools are the way they are is because that society is the way that it is. We have the schools that we really want. I mean, this is actually what we want schools to be, because if we wanted them to be different, we could do it.
Yeah, we could make it different.
That we couldn't do it that way. And anyway, Charles Chapman asked a while back, isn't part of a teacher's job to help guide students to questions and answers? There are differences between fixed instruction and guided learning. Charles, you're such a teacher. I love it. Listen to that. Fixed instruction, guided learning, and unstructured learning. Yes. So like Montessori is relatively unstructured, because it is, you go and you learn about whatever, and, go play in the sandbox, go, work with the manipulatives, whatever, but at the same time, they are still limited by like their environment, by the things that are there. There are always limitations, and that's also part of the learning. So there always is some guidance involved, just in terms of that's the way the world is. The world guides us. We have limitations. There are things that we cannot do. And part of learning is learning about how that works. And just, it's so fascinating, the things that we can and cannot do. Cardinal Doomsday says a noun is a naming word and a verb is a doing verb. And literally, that's coming out on Tuesday.
You've got a video about that.
Filmed that back before, but then things got moved up, and no, not necessarily. A verb is not necessarily a doing word. Sometimes they're not in English.
There are other kinds of verbs. Yeah,
I know. I'm so excited about that. And I think some random geek at some point there was some discussion about Bakunin saying, that some authority, there is justifiable authority based on expertise. If I want to make a boot, I consult the bootstrapper, ironically talking about boots, and with 1984 references there, which I don't think 1984 was around yet, but if it had been, maybe you would have chosen a different profession to refer to. They're ultra tricky. Oh yeah. Opening up the schools. It's ultra tricky. It's much more of a challenge where I live, for a couple of reasons. The first one is that we're not supporting parents and workers in staying home. They have to go to work, and so especially if they have young children, somebody has to look after the kids. There needs to be a grown-up in charge of the kids. So the schools need to be open for those students who need an adult around. No. Steven Pinker is also, I think of him more as a writer and a teacher.
And he's not British. The guy you're thinking of is a British guy, right?
Yeah. But I think it is, Stephen Fry? Is Stephen Fry a person?
Yeah, but he's an actor. I mean, he may have given a TED Talk on this subject, but I don't know if that's who you're thinking of or not.
Maybe it was because he gave a TED Talk and it was about science that I'm associating him with science.
I mean, it may well be. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the talk, but it may well be him.
So, and yes, Steven Pinker is really cool. I love his some of his writing about linguistics. So, and then the other issue here with opening schools up is that we can't effectively do remote instruction because we don't have devices for everybody. Plus, I live in a rural area, so some places, even if we had devices, and even if they technically had internet, it's not great service because we out in the boonies, some of us. I am fortunate enough to live close enough to the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee, that I got really good internet. I like it. and it's state supported.
Yay, socialism.
Fiber optic, which is just like warms my little socialist heart. So,
wouldn't it be great if we could just have that all over the country?
It really, it needs to be a public utility. Gosh.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah, the Chattanooga Choo Choo, right downtown. So, is now a hotel, and it's beautiful and lots of fun. I love our downtown. It's so much fun.
So anyway,
yes. Oh gosh, some random geek mentions that Orwell was an anarchist. and like people are just like, yeah, he was all for capitalism, and I'm like, no, he wasn't. So yeah, okay. So I think I got caught up on the science guy, Bill Nye. No, it wasn't Bill Nye. I would recognize him, despite the fact that Bill Nye is. I'm going to give away our ages here, Steve. Bill Nye is like after my time.
That's
my
true.
My guy was Mr. Science.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Although I will say, even though I was a little bit older than the target age group, I watched Bill Nye when he was on, and I also was even more of a massive fan of Beekman's World. Beekman's World was can't miss TV for me in the 90s.
That I can see that.
I stuck with that show through all of the sidekicks, through Josie, through Liza, through yeah, I mean, absolutely.
You're like a true fan.
I was there, man. I was there with Beekman from the beginning. But yeah,
Daryl Trekkie says that one, and he mentioned this before, that one of his questions in a photography class was come up with a timetable for a 3-day event and how you'd photograph it. And that was too open a question for my idiotic classmates. But part of that, I would guess, and this is also what we see from Shavoi students, is they want to know, like, this is what the assignment is, but what are your expectations?
Right.
How you'd photograph it, how long should this be? I mean, because you could just say, well, I would photograph it with a camera. If you turn in the 3 words with a camera, you're not going to get a good grade on that assignment. I mean, and you should, they're expecting it's got to be something more than that, right? You want more than that. But how much more? How much detail should I give? So they want the parameters for the assignment. And I don't think that's necessarily stupidity.
That's not unreasonable.
On the part of the student, but in most cases. But essentially, I really think Shavoi, because he says he wants, I just want to know what questions you have. If you put in the question, why does the universe work the way that it does, and turn that in, he'd be like, sure, you get an A. Everybody gets an A, because his like, I don't care.
He doesn't care about the grades, right?
Yeah, and he also doesn't care about like the product. Like in education, there's discussion about the process versus the process and the product. And this is especially, it's more of a concern in the elementary grades, where the process sometimes is, okay, so you have this piece of paper and you have this worksheet. On the worksheet is a circle. Cut out the circle, okay? This paper has been printed out in blue and it has a square in it, so cut out the square. And then you glue them together in this, and you follow the teacher's model. Or even like the teacher says, here's this, here's this, here's this, and here's how you glue it together. And there are some people who are like, in the very, very lower grades, what they're doing is, learning fine motor manipulation. They're not actually learning like, this is what an apple looks like because it's made of paper. This is not what an apple looks like. This is what the representation of an apple looks like when you make it with paper.
This is not a pipe.
Exactly. It's napalm beep. So there are some people who say, well, they're learning fine motor manipulation through the use of the scissors and the glue and the crayons and the things like that. But there are also people who say, well, you could accomplish the same thing by saying, here's some paper, here's some scissors, cut things out and just let them go and see what happens. I mean,
right.
You end up with the same thing either way, a mess that you got to clean up. But the only thing that you don't have, and you end up with more student-driven choices. But what you lose is the product at the end. And so I would tend to agree that the trade-off is worth it in favor of the student-driven choice and the loss of the product. However, when you have the product, you have something to show to the parents that this is what your child did. And if all you have is the process, the parent has to trust the teacher that that's what happened. And we don't have that. And also the parent wants something that they can smack on the refrigerator with a magnet and say, this is what my child did. Right. So that's not nothing.
Yeah. Well, and it goes to, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it goes to our instinctive desire to quantify things and to reduce complex things to simple things,
Yeah.
And education and the process of teaching people a complex subject, that's a really complicated thing. And it's difficult. You can't just reduce that to a letter grade and say, well, your kid got an A, therefore they have mastered the subject. Your kid got a D, therefore they're not intelligent, or they don't. I mean, it's way more complicated than that, but we don't like that. We just want a report card with some line items on it. They say, oh, he's doing good. Thanks. Good job, teacher.
It's, yeah, well, or he's not doing good.
Or he's not doing good. Yeah.
But at the same time, there also has to be the illusion of a justification for that. And so, I mean, which is where the rubrics come in, that, your child did this or your child did not do this on this particular assignment, that, so you need to be able to back it up, that this, the average of a 72 was arrived at by this mathematical process. And this mathematical process is a result of these particular assignments, which were weighted in this way. And for each of these assignments, which each have their own grades, you have this set of directions, and here's the things that they did correctly, and here's the things that they didn't do correctly, and here's the product, and here's where you can see what I've marked on their product that aligns with what I marked on the checklist. And that all goes together. So it's all paperwork. It's all paperwork. So there are some benefits to this, which is that theoretically the student now has evidence of what they've done well and where they still are lacking in the skills that are that are taught as part of this course, the knowledge that is taught as part of this course. So, it's you could conceivably, in fact, one of the research essays that I graded that were turned in at the end of last semester, I put a note on this to the student, look, please email me about this, because this particular paragraph is really well written and I can tell it's something that you care about, but it's not the topic that you chose.
Right. It doesn't belong in this paper.
Yeah, it doesn't belong in this paper. It shows a lack of structure and definition to your writing. And I am not my uncle's professor. There's a story in our family about my uncle Tommy, who went to MIT, and I think he got his doctorate there, but he might have just gone as an undergraduate and got his doctorate somewhere else. Anyway, he was a chemist. He had heard that this particular professor, they have blue books, and they would have, proof questions, and you would explain out, not just with formula and stuff, but you would write out the explanation for why this process works this way. And he had heard in the long exams, but he had heard that what the professor would do is read the first one. You would have 5 questions, read the first one, read the last one, and grade it based on that. And then just flip through to make sure that the rest of it was actually there. Mm-hmm. So the story in our family is that, they got these and it was a take-home exam. And so he worked really, really, really hard on the first one and really, really hard on the last one, and then filled in the middle with a detailed account of the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. And he got an A on the exam. And I wish that I have never, it's sort of, it is now legend in our family, but, yeah. I would love to have read his version of Goldilocks and the 3 bears from the blue book. But,
I want to.
Person asks if I've seen Waiting for Superman. I have, but it's been years, and I think that's about the time that Kip came out. I'm just I'm not against the idea of charter schools. I like the possibility that you can take the charter schools allow us to try out different educational models. But, and I understand that that's the justification for freeing them from some of the strictures of, the exams and such, because you're trying it out and you're trying this new thing out, this new theory of here's how we should do education, and it may not work. And you learn from that. But unfortunately, the kids maybe don't progress as much as they should have. And that's okay, because we're trying something out new, and then, they'll progress on, and we'll help them out more later, because that was, we're experimenting on children effectively. And that's what charter schools are. But what I really don't like is that there are some charter schools which are for profit. What the heck? No, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so many problems there. So many problems.
Yeah, I want to address Charles's question from a little earlier in the chat,
Thank
which can
you.
also allow us to swerve back into the
No,
subject
but
of the book.
I can talk about teaching the whole time, and we
No,
won't talk about it. I'm very sorry.
no, it's not. Don't be sorry. I mean, I want to try to keep us
It's pegged. It's
theoretically on subject.
billed. You have advertised this as a book talk, and if we don't,
Exactly.
then I have made that. We have failed to live up to our commitments, Stephen. I will not. I won't do that. Anyway,
Okay.
read Charles's
Charles
question while I sip my tea.
Charles Chapman asked, "What do we think about Shevik's assertion that the examination system is a deterrent to the natural wish to learn?" And I think that's an interesting question because one of the aspects of Erasti society that Shevik is constantly sort of forced to reckon with how different things are here than they were on Anarish. And the way that Erasti's society is set up, it's not just the examination system. The natural wish to learn doesn't seem like it's valued I mean, not that it's not valued at all, but it's not instilled in children that that is a sufficient motivation for schooling, for pursuing their education, et cetera, like it is on Anarish. He's sort of, if he is saying that the examination system stifles the drive to learn, he's judging them by what he's accustomed to on Anarish, where students are conditioned that
No,
that is the goal.
no, no,
No?
no. The whole point of it being a natural wish to learn is that you don't have to condition it. It's natural.
Well, if you're raised in a society that doesn't value it, then whether
Yes.
it's a natural wish or not, I mean, it's not going to be an instinctive motivation.
Your society can either, support what is natural, or, I mean, there's some ways in which, the video that I just wrote today, where I had the bit from Miss Manners, where
Yes.
she says, in the column, which I don't actually get into it in the video, she talks about that we sort of swing back and forth like a pendulum between, having a sense of decorum and this is how things should be done, and then pushing back against it, going, why can't we just like do what comes naturally? And
Right.
then we do what comes naturally, and people just are like, wow,
Why'd we do that?
why do we do that? And we need some structure. So it goes back and forth. And I think that the same thing can be true here. Just because something is natural does not mean that it's good for you. Let's be honest.
Oh, no, that's absolutely right.
Cyanide are naturally occurring substances, and they're not really good for us.
That's absolutely right. But but I think it's
yes. I think I totally agree with Shives' point. Sort of.
Well, he comes from a society where
It was natural.
yeah, he comes from a yes it is. He comes from a society where the priorities are just very different. Where he comes from, education is about learning, and that's the most important thing. And on Urus, it's there's competition between the students. There's the desire to be ranked and to know. I think there's a line, some random geek quoted it a while back. There's a line in the chapter about, well, if you don't evaluate us, how will we know that, how will the hardworking students know that they're superior to the dull students?
Yeah. But see, here's the thing though. The question is not, are students learning? The question is, what are they learning? Because in both cases, the students are learning exactly what the society values.
Yeah, they're always learning something.
These students have learned that very well already, and that is exactly what their questions show. They know what is important to their parents, to their peers, to their other teachers, to everybody in their society. They have learned that. They have learned that, you need a stamp from an authority figure that says, here is my evaluation of you. That's what matters. The learning that you get in and of itself is not as important as that evaluation,
The approval,
that judgment. That is what is important in that society. And they are not wrong. That is what their society values. And Shavik is learning from them that this is what, you know, like he knows it, but it's different to experience it.
Right. And there are other things about, like, again, in this chapter, we see him sort of, you know, taking the good with the bad. There are things about Erasti's society that even though they are very different from what he is accustomed to, that he kind of develops an appreciation for. But there's also always like a flip side to it. Like he appreciates.
And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about Le Guin's treatment of this, and that's why it doesn't come across as this is good and this is bad. It doesn't come across nearly as didactic as Orwell's work, which is just like, it's so preachy, bless his heart.
Well, because he notices and he appreciates the fact that because the students, unlike the students on Anarish, because the students are free to focus exclusively on their schoolwork, they are more focused and more sort of motivated and more tireless in their studies, because they don't have to do the other sort of the work to keep the society going that is required of people on Anarish. They can just be students.
Yes.
And they, you know, and whereas on his world, yes, students are students, but everybody
gotta work.
Everybody has to pitch in to make things work. Yeah.
Yes.
And
but they're going to die.
But by the same token, he also notices that their freedom is more limited. You know, because a person on Anarish is theoretically free to do whatever they want to do. On Urus, even though the students are freed from the obligation of working outside of their studies, the things that they can choose to do are much more limited than for a person. So that's sort of like, to Shavik, that would be the downside, is that it's the trade-off is you have the luxury of focusing exclusively on your education, but your options as far as what you choose to do are much more limited.
And Daryl Trekkie asks, why is everything about competition? The students should say, hey, if I take this and that away from the classes, I don't care what so-and-so takes away from the classes. Well, it's because their society values competition. So, you know, that's what matters to the world around them. So they are part of the world around them. So it totally makes sense for them to value that as well.
And there is a certain amount of that I think is innate, but there's no question that our society it encourages us to focus on that. You know what I mean? Like our society definitely inculcates that in us, as you know, where it's important to keep up with or surpass your neighbors and your colleagues, and to view people as competition and to not fall behind. Even if you're dealing with an area where that doesn't really actually matter. You know,
Charles brought that, sort of touched on that when he said that we find out that Shavik's motivation isn't just a natural desire to learn, but a desire to use a limited commodity, time, in an enjoyable manner. And that when we talk about students falling behind, a lot of, I mean, on my Facebook feed and my various social media feeds, there's a lot about, we need to not worry about students falling behind. Students are surviving, and that's the most important part. And while I agree, that means that as teachers, as administrators, as political leaders, and as members of society, we need to be ready. We need to be preparing now for what we're going to do once the pandemic is over, and how we're going to adjust students and adjust our own expectations for, are we simply going to simplify graduation requirements? Are we going to just say, you know what, everybody graduates. There you go. Ta-da. And not just that year, but for like the next decade subsequently. How are we going to adjust what we expect a graduate to know and to be able to do? Because there are those expectations. You expect that someone who graduates with a high school diploma will be able to read, will be literate. And that if they have been able to fake it and not actually cannot read text, that they've gotten really good at like developing supplemental skills that allow them to fake their way through. I mean, that's like, I think we would be surprised at anyone who made it through all of their schooling and received a diploma and could not actually, like, was literally illiterate. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes.
And Charles, I actually did underline the bit of the quote here that Chevitt could not imagine a greater deterrent to the natural wish to learn than what I underlined was this pattern of cramming in the information and disgorging it at demand.
Yeah.
Now, the note that I added was that evaluation is needed. I mean, students need to know, when they're doing a thing, what is the effect of this thing? Not just the natural effect, but for example, if you're creating art, and you're trying to, and you're looking out at the world and you're trying to render the impression, the visual impression of a three-dimensional world onto a two-dimensional space, there are various techniques for making that happen. And if the student is trying this out, even if they're not being directly instructed at all, the student just said, hey, draw something. Draw what you see, or even draw what you see is guidance from the teacher, and so maybe they're using, or maybe they've been taught about 1 or 2 point perspective, and they're doing that. The teacher can then provide some evaluation on, I notice here you're struggling with, your use of line, that here it's not matching up. Evaluation can help the student know what someone else sees. And that's so useful, especially if it comes from somebody who knows what the heck they're talking about or what they should be looking for. So yeah, I think evaluation is helpful. And I guess you could say it's not really needed, but it takes a lot of the guesswork out for the student. If the teacher can say, look, I think I know what you're trying to do. And here's one of the things that I'm seeing as a problem with what you're trying to do. I mean, maybe that's not what you're trying to do, but if I know what I'm doing as a teacher, I know what you're trying to do. I can see it in what you're doing. Okay. So, and yes, it is the exams go against the natural wish to learn. But again, it goes back to learning about the society and what the society values. So they are learning something through these exams. It's just not Chevick's subject. Right. So that's why he doesn't like it. They're not learning physics.
Charles also mentioned in another post in the chat that one of the problems that Chevick realizes as he goes through this term and teaching these classes is that ability to focus just on the academic stuff is actually, and not just that, but that is part of what is sort of sapping his motivation. Like he finds it more and more difficult to actually work and get things done. And
yes, because he sees it in himself too. Yes.
Well, and the text tells us that it's not that he doesn't do anything. And it says that like over the course of about 6 months, not only is he teaching his classes, but he writes papers and he goes and visits places. Like he's keeping very active and he's doing things. But he doesn't feel like any of it's real. He says the longer that he stays on Uras, the less real it seems.
He's busy.
He's busy, but he's not doing things that matter. And
yes.
And we find out a little bit later in the chapter. There's a scene.
Talk to David Graeber.
Yeah,
he's making his own bullshit job.
There's a thing a little bit later in the chapter that kind of gives us some insight into why Chevick might feel that way, but we're not there yet. But Lisa
Garrison says that she's been looking at returning to college, and yeah, a lot of universities are waiving the standardized test requirements just because normally you're in a room with a whole bunch of other people for hours at a time, and we're like, maybe that's not the healthiest option right now. So yeah, at least good luck with that. However it ends up going, just pace yourself and do what you can, and don't be aware of wherever you end up going, what options there are for help, both financially and with your studies, and use them. Don't be, a lot of times we feel like asking for help is, some sign of deficiency, but it takes courage to ask for help. So good luck with that. I mean, really, really best of luck. Yeah, not just, I don't know. From the snap. The snap.
from
I don't
from
know.
from the Avengers.
Oh, that was previously.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, and I'm sorry, we're still on the God, I could just talk.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So I want to let's get to his experience with money.
No, I'm
No,
not there yet.
no.
I have notes. I
Okay,
have notes.
okay, okay.
Okay.
Well,
So
let's get to your notes.
this was interesting. And it relates to what we said, so I'm just gonna say it and go
Go
on.
go for it. Go for it.
Okay. Good luck with your writing, dear Ultra Trekkie. Live long and prosper. So he's been talking about at first he refused to give any tests or grades, but it upset the university administrators so badly that, not wishing to be discourteous to his hosts, he gave in.
Yeah.
Oh shoot, now my and then later on he gives the assignment to the students. He's like, okay, here, I will give grades. You will do this thing. I will just give you have to have grades, so I'm just going to give you all an A. Or, give them all the highest mark.
The highest grade, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And to his surprise, a good many students came to him to complain. They're like, but we have to earn the A by doing these things. And so he says, if no competitive distinctions were to be made, one might as well do nothing. And he's like, okay, if you don't want to do the work, then you shouldn't do it. They're like, but. And so my question is, why was he willing to cave to the administration, but not to the students?
Well, don't you think it's because as you've said already in this show, he's not stupid. And even though he may not believe in the justness of the hierarchy, he knows
it's there.
He knows it exists and that he is subject
he's living in it now.
He has chosen to make himself subject to it by coming to this planet and choosing to do this. And he knows that if he pisses off and even though he is a celebrity and he is a guest and he is the man from the moon, even if he pisses off the administration too much, like, they don't have to let him do this. Like, they can find somebody else to teach these classes.
They don't have to offer these classes. Period.
They don't have. Yeah. So exactly. So he recognizes that the administrators are the people that he needs to play ball with. And he wants to, of course he wants to, he's playing a different ball game with the students. He's hoping that the students he can get them more interested in learning as opposed to being evaluated and getting good grades. But if he wants the opportunity to do that.
Authority over the students.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
And he exercises it. Dun, dun, dun.
The corruption of Shevik. Yeah.
Bless his heart.
Yeah.
So yeah, he forced himself to work. Like we said earlier, one of the other notes I have is he seemed to have lost the flair, which in his own estimation of himself, he counted as his main advantage, the sense for where the really important problem lay. And that's the thing the students are struggling with. Mm-hmm. Like, well, but if I don't have guidance, what do I do? I mean, on the nice thing about on Naris, like, he had guidance in the form of, what does my society need from me?
Right.
And that provides some guidance. Whereas here it's like, you can learn about, you're our guest. You don't have to teach these classes. You do whatever you want. But at the same time, it's that choice paralysis is really what it is. There has actually been research done on this, that when you have like a whole bunch of things to choose from and it's like a lot, it's overwhelming.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that choice paralysis is what he's experiencing, and what also he put, he introduced the students to that they didn't have part of that. I do, my next notes are the money part, so we can
the money part, because
indulging me in my rants about teaching.
I enjoy it, and I think the people who watch enjoy it.
I so hope so.
Yeah, so he has money for the first time in his life, because we're told that, first of all, he has a bank account on Urus, because we remember he was given an award some years back, and part of that award came with a monetary prize.
Yeah.
So he has 10,000 units, let's just call it. I think that's what they refer to it as, 10,000 monetary units international monetary units, or they just call them units for short, in the bank. And then he also got a grant from the government, so that's another 5,000. And then he also has gotten paid for these papers that he has published since he's been there,
and for teaching.
and he gets a salary for being a teacher. Yeah, so he has money now, and at first he's like he doesn't really know what to do with it. We're told that he read an economics textbook, but he gave up. Like, he put it down because he just found it so boring. And you can relate to that, because I live in a capitalist society, and I find economics to be a relatively dry, boring subject. I can only imagine if I came from a planet where this form of economics simply did not exist and had absolutely no relevance to my life at all, that I would find it even more of a dull, impenetrable subject. So I can totally get where he's coming from there. But eventually he decides to spend some of his money. He decides to go shopping.
But before that,
yes.
Like when he's trying to understand it and he can't, but he comes into it against the idea. So there's some judgment there that he's carrying. And it also, I mean, we really don't know what their economics textbooks say. Like, a lot of ours talk about, this is how this system works and why this, but they're all created systems.
Right. Yeah.
They are. So it's and a lot of textbooks seem to lose sight of that. Like, they say, this is how it works. Well, this is how it works because it was
because that's how it's designed. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and some random geek says, well, terrible assumptions about humanity. He kind of gets that, he's like, in the rights of the money changers, where greed, laziness, and envy were assumed to move all men's acts, even the terrible became banal. So he's just like, he looks at this, just gimme. I have to, there must be more money. There must be more money. There must be more money. Like in, was it the Rocking Horse, I think it's a short story. And, but what I underlined was he could not admit that, in fact, it frightened him. And I underlined that and put, why? Why does that frighten him?
Don't you think part of it is probably because he can imagine himself becoming a part of that system? I mean, I think that's what it is. I think that's part of what it is. I mean, part of it is probably it's frightening to him because he sees it as very destructive, and he knows that, there are advantages to the way his people live that are precluded by a system like this. But I think he also, by this point, he's been here for several months now. We've seen how easily he can function in this world, and how he even has he has developed a sincere admiration and appreciation for a lot of it. So but he also, it goes against some of his most deeply held principles.
Rocking Horse Winner, that's what it was. Yes. And it is creepy. Yeah, it's an interesting. Is that Shirley Jackson? She's great at that. So.
But yeah, that's what I would say. Part of it is that he's afraid, like some random geek says in the chat, he's afraid that it might be true for him too.
Well, so what if it is? So
well, he obviously doesn't like that idea.
Well, no. But there's a difference between not liking it and being afraid. Like, obviously, I mean, having it, I would say it like what I'm thinking about this is that he's afraid that the only reason he is the way he is because he grew up where he did. Mm-hmm. He was shaped by his society. The reason he values what he does, the reason that he is himself, is not because of himself, but because of his surroundings. Like, he is essentially afraid of losing his identity. If he had grown up here on Anaris, or excuse me, if he'd grown up on Eris, he would have not been himself. He would not have been the person that he is. Well,
and that's true.
It absolutely is. But at the same time, he is now getting an opportunity that nobody else has. Literally nobody else has. The opportunity to see different things and to make choices which weren't available to him on Anaris. And he has the opportunity to decide, when given more freedom to choose, is this what he truly values? What does he value? What is important to him? The way that people on Anaris don't necessarily have, there are options that are literally not available to them because that's not where they are. They're just like I was saying earlier about what children who are learning in, completely unstructured environments, that it's structured literally by the environment. How big is that sandbox that you're allowed to just go play in? Well, that determines, what tools do you have? How many Legos are there? Are there Legos, or are there blocks, or are there both? And how, just the laws of gravity work. There are limits. There are always limits. And the limits here are different. The structures here are different. And he's learning about that. And it makes me a little bit sad that it frightens him. Because so it's different, and that's what you decided that you're going to learn. It's okay, that he's not. I feel like he's being judgy on himself, and he's not willing to forgive himself, or not even forgive himself, but just to accept that he also is human. I mean, dude, you are, or not Terran necessarily. He's a different person,
more or less.
Person. And, yes, you have greed and laziness and envy. You're not perfect. Get over yourself.
Well, he also, he judges himself a bit earlier in the chapter as well, when he confronts his lack of motivation. And he determines, well, this is my insufficiency. I'm just not ready for this world. I can't handle, this freedom from work, sort of like I'm not able to take full advantage of this because it's my fault.
You know what? Get over yourself. You're not perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay.
But there's
a lot of learning how to prioritize and how to follow through on your priorities is hard. It's hard, Shavik. Okay, it's hard, and that's okay.
But that is his condition.
Because there's the possibility that it's true for everyone, and that there's no better nature to appeal to in humanity. But obviously there is, because he has seen things go differently. He knows, unlike anybody else here on this planet, as opposed to the moon, he knows that there is something different. He has experienced something different.
But
he more than anybody else in the entire universe has true freedom to choose.
Maybe his fear is that the way of Anarish is merely different, but not inherently better. Because we know that people on Anarish are taught that their way of life is not just different from Oris, it's better. And maybe Shavik is afraid that the longer he stays here, even though he recognizes all of the problems, or not, but he sees many. He doesn't think that they have an ideal society at all on Earth. He notices many problems that they have, but he also sees advantages, and he notices things that bring to mind disadvantages that people face on Anarish. And maybe he's part of what he's afraid of is realizing, oh, maybe this system isn't better or worse than ours. Maybe it's just different. And maybe it's just we on Anarish had a preference and chose a different way to live that we thought worked better for us, but that doesn't make it inherently superior to the system that another society might be using. And that might be kind of disillusioning for him.
Maybe. I don't quite think that. I think it's more more of a fear of loss of identity, of self, of who I agree with you. The person that he has always believed that he is, that kind of that he isn't strong enough on his own to resist the temptations that Earth offers.
Yeah.
Charles Chapman says being frightened isn't the issue, not being able to admit the fear is the problem. I think the fear is also a problem because I think, like I said, I think his fear comes from a lack of willingness to accept, to forgive himself for, lack of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And I do. I think that's a problem, especially as a teacher, and especially as a teacher of young students who are almost adults and who are in advanced classes and who have developed this self-identity of somebody who gets things right the first time, somebody who's smart, somebody who is better than others at doing things. Even if they don't, have that sort of sense, that sense of entitlement. And like when you offer them a task that they don't, that is really hard and they don't get right the first time, it they blame you, and they think that you're being unreasonable, and it can be really, or they blame themselves, and that that maybe they don't belong, maybe they're not smart, and there's just so much going on there. First of all, it's okay not to be smart. It's okay. Being smart doesn't give you more or less value as a person. And that's what I want them to learn. And, that's what I want Shevik to learn here, is that, wanting to have nice things and taste nice things and feel nice things, that those indulgences, wanting to be comfortable and for things to go smooth. Why can't things go smooth? That's natural, and it's not necessarily like greedy to want comfortable, pleasurable things, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And as Emerleon says, there's different kinds of smart, and that's one of the things that you mentioned about societies being better. Better is such a vague word. Better in what way? Same thing with smart. Smart
but obviously they clearly perceive it as being superior, and I don't. Yeah.
But and there are so
we don't need to deconstruct like what exactly they mean by, but clearly they have.
He hasn't completely thought it through because he's afraid of it. That stops him from thinking it through and exploring it as freely as he otherwise might be because of that fear.
Right. So, like I said before, he goes shopping, and he goes shopping because he wants to buy a new suit, because he realizes that his Anarchism suit makes him stand out more than he wants to.
Yes.
He wants to blend in, and so he goes to buy a more Arasti style suit of clothes. And there's this passage here that I want to read, because it's one of my favorite passages in the book so far, just the way it's written. And
I have something I'm going to say after that.
Huh?
I have something I'm going to say after that.
Oh, great. Okay. So you already know what passage I'm going to read. So it's Shevik sort of experiencing what it's like in the shopping district. And it says, the whole experience had been so bewildering to him that he put it out of mind as soon as possible. But he had dreams about it for months afterwards, nightmares. Sayam to Navia Prospect was 2 miles long, and it was a solid mass of people, traffic, and things. Things to buy, things for sale, coats, dresses, gowns, robes, trousers, breeches, shirts, blouses, hats, shoes, stockings, scarves, shawls, vests, capes, umbrellas, clothes to wear while sleeping, while swimming, while playing games, while at an afternoon party, while at an evening party, while at a party in the countryside, while at a party in the country, while traveling, while at the theater, while riding horses, gardening, receiving guests, boating, dining, hunting, all different, all in hundreds of different cuts, styles, colors, textures, materials, perfumes, clocks, lamps, statues, cosmetics, candles, pictures, cameras, games, vases, sofas, kettles, puzzles, pillows, dolls, colanders, hassocks, jewels, carpets, toothpicks, calendars, a baby's teething rattle of platinum with a handle of rock crystal, an electrical machine to sharpen pencils, a wristwatch with diamond numerals, figurines and souvenirs and kickshaws and mementos and gewgaws and bric-a-brac, everything either useless to begin with or ornamented so as to disguise its use. Acres of luxuries, acres of excrement. In the first block, Shevik had stopped to look at a shaggy spotted coat, the central display, and a glittering window of clothes and jewelry. The coat costs 8,400 units, he asked in disbelief, for he had recently read in a newspaper that a, quote, living wage was about 2,000 units a year. Oh, yes, that's real fur, quite rare now that the animals are protected, Pi had said. Pretty thing, isn't it? Women love furs. And they went on. After one more block, Shevik had felt utterly exhausted. He could not look any more. He wanted to hide his eyes. What an extraordinary passage that is.
Charles Chapman said, I tried to read one of those sentences in one breath. It didn't happen.
I mean, what I loved about it was, first of all, it's a style of scene that is not all that uncommon. It's a list. It's the writer is communicating to us the character sort of being hyper engaged and overwhelmed, and they're doing it by just, it's literally like he saw this and this and this and this and this and this, and it's, you know, so but it's a great example of that kind of scene, and the word choices,
and the choices of which items to mention is deliberate.
It works together so well. There's great use of very, very, very judicious use, but very effective use of things like alliteration, where she goes straight from puzzles to pillows, but she doesn't do that all the time. It's not so alliterative that it gets annoying. Obnoxious. Yeah. But it's really, really well written. And then at the end of it, he can't even look at it anymore. Like, he's so overwhelmed. He's just like, God, just get me out of here. I cannot look at any more of this stuff. I really, really love that passage. And there's part of it almost sounds Seussian at certain points, doesn't it?
Oh, well, of course, as I said in the chat, it makes me think of VeggieTales.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. The Stuff Mart.
We represent the Stuff Mart, a magic land of goodies. Can we come in, please? So, some random geek, if you want to include a link in the chat, and I would suggest that we put it in the description, to the Stuff Mart rap. Joe McClure, anyone else feel called out by the electric pencil sharpener? Like, legitimately? Now, in fairness, this is just the box because it's very convenient. I don't remember what I brought home from school now, but that's like, if you order a pencil sharpener at school, that's what you get. You get that. Yeah. So, but yeah, the episode that it's from is Madame Blueberry, who she lives in a treehouse, and she is so blue. She is so blue because she does not have enough stuff. The story, I think, is told by the French Peas. That's why there's accents. But so she gets catalogs that have all these things, advertisements for all these things that she doesn't have. And she's like, she looks around at the things that she does have, and she's just like, oh, something's no good. These knives have gone dull and don't slice like they should. And she just goes on and on. Yes, the Stuff Mart song. And so she is very sad. She is so blue, she don't know what to do. And so then these three salesmen show up and tell her about a new store that is opened up nearby called the Stuff Mart, and it has everything.
Lots of stuff. So
lots of stuff. And so she can go there and just buy everything that she wants. And so when they're there and they're telling her about this, she says, so if I buy more things, then I will be happy. And they're like, oh, yes. And she looks over at Larry and Bob the tomato says, I don't think that's true. And they take her over to explore the stuff mart. She's just in awe. I mean, this is clearly. I mean, I remember when Super Walmart was first a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and
It is overwhelming the first time you walk into a store like that. Yeah.
Like, I mean, I was in college when one opened in the city where I was, and we would just like, you know, I was in a dorm and you knock on, it's like 1 a.m. Hey, want to go to Super Walmart? We would like all get together. We'd pile in the car. We'd all go, and we'd like first you'd like buy snacks, and then we'd all go around. We'd just walk around Walmart and look at all the stuff from like 1 to 3 a.m.
Yeah.
We'd go back to the dorm, and it was so yeah, paradox of choice. And I think they're referencing choice paralysis.
Yeah.
In that, I would guess. But yeah, it's just there's so much stuff. And of course, in Super Walmart, the aisles are much wider than would have been typical at a grocery store or a department store. And yeah, it's like acres.
Yeah, it's massive
stuff. And I mean, it was just like I mean, I would guess. I mean, I grew up during and after malls, but I would presume that would be similar. I mean, because you went from like shopping districts to shopping centers to malls where everything, it's all like one store. It's just,
right.
It's stores everywhere. You know, I just, wow. And I can totally see where he's getting, but the aisles being wider in Walmart, it helps. It's really smart of them because it helps keep the stuff. You have like breathing room. It helps keep it from being too overwhelming. But there's just like, you can't see the end. There's no end. Literally, like you look around, and you're like, all you see is Walmart.
Yeah,
it's so weird. Oh my goodness. So yeah.
So yeah. Anything else about his
right there at the bottom? Stuff Mart.
Stuff Mart.
Yep.
Yeah, so he goes shopping and he gets his clothes and he has that moment of, oh, the coat costs how much? It costs four times as much as an annual living wage. That's interesting.
And he also talks, it's just the buyers and sellers. It's like it's all about owners. And I disagree. They had no relation to the things but that of possession. And I don't know that I entirely agree with that. Because in the other book that we're reading that we haven't read in a while, the Bloody Jack series, what Jackie wants. She doesn't want to necessarily own stuff. She wants to take stuff from where it is produced, or harvested and take it to people who need it, who may not be in the same location. And I mean, they do have that on Anaris. You know, goods that are produced over here may be needed over there, and that's okay. You know, so now, but the thing is, none of this stuff, like, you know, gewgaws and bric-a-brac, it's not needed. Right. And I think that's his issue. It's like all this stuff that we don't actually, they're just, that we don't actually need. So, yeah.
Right. And then, so after that, we're told, we learn about, well, the school takes a break, and he's doing his best to fill his free time.
The end of the section.
Yes.
Thus clothed, his resemblance to his mother Rulag was stronger than ever.
Oh yeah, I noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's. Well, Lisa Garrison, they can find out if they watch Mallrats. She says, "I miss malls. Kids today have no idea what they missed out on."
Just watch Mallrats.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's crazy and cheesy as anything, and somewhat what's the word? Self-flagellating.
Yes, yes, yes. And a great one of the all, perhaps the greatest of all Stan Lee cameos. I would say. I would say it's better than any of his cameos in the MCU movies.
Oh yeah, but
Yeah.
of course the one that got me was Into the Spider-Verse, because that was right after. I mean, I'm just like,
Oh yeah, sure, of course. That was right after he died. Yeah.
yeah. So that was, I mean, that was it for me. Oh, just rip my freaking heart out.
I
Okay.
have I made an animated GIF of his exchange with Brody when Brody says to Stan Lee, he's like, you know, you must get laid a lot as because you're Stan Lee. And Stan Lee says, oh yeah, me and Jagger used to have a running contest, and last time I checked, I was way ahead. And Brody just goes, damn, that's hot.
Is he Stan Lee?
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, so then he mentions he's not able to fit in completely, because he mentions that he tries to eat meat, but it just doesn't work. He decides to stay vegetarian because he just can't he can't bring himself to do it.
Well, not just that, but I mean, his body is like, no, this is not food.
Yeah, well, because they don't. Yeah, like it's not even an option where he's from. They don't have meat. Yeah. They don't have animals. That's it. Like, you know, so he's probably never, ever, ever eaten meat once in his entire life before he came here. So yeah, you think it would be not only a challenge to his palate, but also probably to his digestion, you know?
So they're in the chat, they're talking about the cameo in Captain Marvel, because Snakebit Cat says Stan's cameo in Captain Marvel is the best, because Stan Lee was playing Stan Lee on his way to go play Stan Lee in Mallrats.
Yes, yes.
So it's very kind of Inception-y.
Yeah, it was hilarious. Absolutely. So, but yeah, so and he gets approached during his break by Shavoi Lisk, who it turns out is a commie agent.
An agent of the state. So
yeah.
As they're talking, Shavoi Lisk is an interesting character, and like when he says I want to be disagreeable, I'm like, oh man, dude, I feel you. It's so much fun to be disagreeable. So. No, actually, he's not. He's from Thu, some random geek. He says agent for the State Capitalism Society. No, he is an agent for the State Socialist. He's from the commie version or the commie group.
Yeah, the analog for the Soviets, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And then they have you know a more. We'll have to talk about that. They have a more open conversation than we've seen them have, certainly. And I think Shevik sort of relaxes a bit and gets into talking about things. Like I underlined when he's talking about Anaris, he's like, look, we ain't a bunch of idealists. We're very practical, because what is idealistic about social cooperation, mutual aid, when if we don't do it, we're going to die.
Right.
You know, there's nothing idealistic about that. We have to cooperate.
I thought that was a really good line. Yeah. It's like, we have no choice. We're not idealistic at all anymore. He said, yeah, they used to be. The founders of our society were idealists.
They absolutely were, but we can be, or we'll, I mean, yeah. So yeah. And so, yes, he said, it's interesting. I boxed where Shevik says, you are archists, and I'm like, yes, that word makes total sense, and I've never seen it before.
Yeah. And again, we get the sense of Shevik valuing what he considers the superiority of the Anarish system, because he argues with Shafoilis. Shafoilis says, hey, we in Thu, we're socialists just like you guys are.
Yeah.
And he says, and he says, no, you're not, because your society is extremely centralized, and our society isn't. Our society isn't centralized at all, except for the ways that it has to be for things to work.
Hang on, where are you at?
Right after, but you are archists. The state of Thu is even more centralized than the state of
IEO. Yes.
IEO, yeah.
But he doesn't say that we're not centralized. He doesn't claim that in ours, because it talks about that in
the previous chapter.
That
it's centralized to an extent.
To an extent, based on practicality,
because it has to be, yeah.
So yeah, I also circled. He says, Shavoilis says, why don't you come to Thu and see how real socialism functions? And Shavok's like, I know how real socialism functions. I could tell you. So they're both convinced that they're right, and I like that so much.
Yeah,
they're both very confident in what they believe. Yes. Yeah,
well,
he's not entirely comfortable. He's more comfortable than we have seen him in a lot of Charles Chapman, because I talked about him opening up some. He's not completely just at ease. I don't know that we've ever seen him completely at ease.
But he brings up in this conversation with Shafoilis another one of those benefits that he sees in IEO society. Although, and this time it's relative to Thu, not relative to Anarish, because in Anarish he has complete freedom. But the reason that the thing that he says right after the line you quoted, when he says, I could tell you, like, I know what real socialism is. He says, but would your government let me explain it to you? Because the government in Thu, apparently, they're not just centralized socialists. They're also apparently authoritarian. It's implied that they are of an authoritarian government, and that Shavok fears if he went there, that he would not have the freedom that he has in the place where he is. So,
but it's also interesting because he says, I could explain it to you, but would your government let me explain it in Thu? He's like, I can explain it to you because you're here.
Right.
But
I have the freedom here to talk about it.
Could I explain it to the rest of your citizenry?
Right.
And then down at the bottom of the page, I wrote, what is Shafoilis doing in IEO? What is, because, and I think he tells us later that he is there on behalf of his, or at least the government knows he's there.
Yeah, he's an agent.
Yes. But an agent to what end? For what purpose? Why? Just like what we're also wondering about Shavok. Why? I mean, we know he's chosen it, but, different people want different things. What does IEO want from him? What, and we find more about that later as well. Yeah. But also, Shafoilis is also, fish out of water in a similar way to Shavok, although, being at least from this planet and having some awareness, more interaction with IEO in Thu than the people of Anarch have had. They've been completely cut off. Well, almost completely cut off beyond the shipments. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit more. I think Shafoilis understands it a little bit better than Shavok did when he first got there because of where they were from. But they're in very similar situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also learn that even though Shafoilis is from the more authoritarian country, he tells Shavok that right here in IEO, his room is bugged.
And he knows it.
And he knows it. And
he knows it. I mean,
and that's why he wanted to, because when Shafoilis first approaches Shavok and says, hey, can we talk? Shavok says, okay, you want to talk? Let's go to my place. And he suggests the library, and he offers an excuse for this and says, oh, there's something at the library I need to pick up. Let's just go talk at the library. But it turns out the reason he wants to go to the library is because he knows that Shavok's room has a listening device and his room has a listening device, and he what he has to say is not for anybody else to hear, so he says, let's go to the library where we can speak freely.
Yeah. And then I marked the first mention of the secret police.
Yes.
And then then Shevik asks him, "Are you also an agent of your government?" Shafoilov's face closed down. Then he turns suddenly to Shevik, speaking softly and with hatred. And I circled that. I found that really, really interesting.
Yeah. Well, it reminded me. It reminded me of. It implies that he has no choice but to be an agent of his government. You know,
So
like he
what is
says
his hatred for?
for the fact that he has no choice but to be an agent of his government. I mean,
There's
like
always
well, yeah, but okay, but the choice could be, you know, if he wanted to be here at this university in this place, he had to be an agent of his government to do it, which is interesting because he seems to have some degree of pride in, at least in parts of how his society is arranged. You know, he says, you know, we're socialists like you, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, you know, when the way he says, like, of course I am, or I wouldn't be here, you know, like he speaks with hatred because that is the only way he could be here. And that feels wrong to him. Like he doesn't like that, you know, the only way that he would be free to go to this other place would be is if the only way his government would let him go would be if he were providing information to them about this other place. And obviously he's not.
So you think he, despite excuse me, despite having some pride in their system, that he also hates that. He hates the system that forces him to report back to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's what the text is telling us.
I was thinking that he hated himself for being willing to do that, for making that choice, for selling out.
That could be it too.
So
that could be it too.
And especially, you know, and again, down towards the bottom of the page for me, he forced his words out in a kind of torment. You've got to look around you, Shevik. What torments him and why? And I think it's being alluded to. It's being developed, that we don't know exactly what it is that he hates or what has him so upset here. So,
well, that's right. That's right before the passage where he talks about how naive Shevik is.
Yeah. You just think people are just doing this for funsies? No.
Yeah. Well, and he says, like, do you think they just brought you here to be nice? Like they want something from you. And Shevik then counters that by saying, I know exactly what they want. And I'm counting on them wanting it because
column A, little column B. Yeah.
I'm counting on them wanting it because I'm going to use it to bargain with them. You know.
And that I feel like that, you know, yeah, and that catches Shavoi off guard. He's like, oh. And but Shevik says something that I don't fully agree with, which is they think if people can here, not you. They think if people can possess enough things, they will be content to live in prison. And not entirely content, because they also see what happens when you have not things. So there's also fear that drives it as well. So it's not just that like okay, we're in a nice comfortable box. Not necessarily. It's also, you know, the knowledge that the possessing and the enough things, the having enough things, that can be taken away from you.
Right.
And the fear of that.
And he says that what he wants human solidarity. And he says on Anarish, I worked for it, and now, or I worked for it on Anarish as I could, and I work for it now as I can on Urus. And on Anarish, I acted Here I bargain.
Because
And
that's the option that I've
yeah,
got.
and the thing that he's bargaining with is, and we have to, it reminds us that Shevik is like a genius. He's a great scientific mind. The thing he's bargaining with is this theory called the general temporal theory that is extremely coveted by pretty much everybody.
Yes.
And he reveals to Shafoilis that he has it. He hasn't written it down anywhere. He has it in his mind. He has figured out whatever the central problem is. He just hasn't written it down. And
Because he knows that once he does,
right,
it's not his anymore.
right. Well, and there's a really good exchange.
He's egoizing.
He's egoizing it. Well, there's a really good exchange.
He's being possessive. It is his right now. It's his theory. He has it. It gives him power and authority over others. It gives him power over others, and he is using that.
Yeah. Well, he's being practical.
Yes.
Yeah. He
rather
has learned,
than idealistic and just offering it to everyone.
Exactly. He has learned the rules of this society, and he is doing what he can to achieve his goal in this context. Yeah. Then there's an exchange between Shafoilis and he that I really like, where Shafoilis asks him, did you write it down? And Shevik says no. And Shafoilis says, well, good, because if you did write it down, then they would have it. And Shevik says, well, what do you mean? And Shafoilis says, where there are papers in locked rooms, there are people with keys to the rooms. And I just love that expression, that if it exists in the world outside of your head, then someone can get it. And it is compromised.
And Shevik knows this, and he says, I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't like it. Yeah, exactly. That's basically what he says.
Except he says it fancily. He says, this is very disagreeable.
Yeah. I don't like it.
So, yeah. And another guy that we just really like. Yeah. Like I like Shevik so much, but he's very much like Chris Evans. You just like him.
Yeah.
Just like him.
Well, I thought this passage was interesting because it not only does it reveal a little bit more about Shevik's motivations and about what brought him here in the first place, which the book has done a good job of kind of doling out bit by bit without. But it also lets us see that Shevik is not quite as naive as we might have thought, because he is aware of his situation and he is aware of what he has that can help him in his situation, and he's willing to use it.
So I also mentioned Shafoilis says, the highest cause I can ever serve is the strength and welfare of my country. And I love that, Shevik says, you're lying.
Yeah.
You're lying to me. And he says, he continues, he says, yes, I believe you are a patriot, but there are other things that are more important to you. And he says, you would not betray me. He doesn't even say, I believe you would not betray me. He just flat out says, you would not betray me.
And Shafoilis says, no, I would if I could.
But it's interesting that Shevik says this peaceably, and it comes across as very confidently. Like, yes, this is how it is. And I would if I could, Shafoilis says savagely. As though he's not trying just to convince. He is telling Shevik this, and he is trying to convince him this. You need to know this. I think he's also trying to convince himself.
Yeah, like I do serve my country above all.
Remember this, remember this, remember this. Do not forget this. It is very dangerous to forget this.
Yeah.
But also I put in my margin note, when Shevik says you would not betray me, how does he know that? I don't know that we've been, that we've seen enough of Shafoilis in the text, and we haven't seen enough of their interactions to really understand why Shevik thinks this.
Yeah, we haven't seen. I kind of felt the same thing. I just assumed that they'd gotten to know each other
P.S. Don't forget, Shevik is a genius. Not just, and that applies not just in physics. He's a really smart guy. And so, maybe, I guess he's just a good, or we are to presume that he is a good judge of character. Yeah. Shavoi also goes on to say, you picked the wrong people to try to make brothers of. But let's not forget, it's not just Shevik's choice to come to IEO. Why did he come to IEO first? Why not to Thu? I think it's because of the university and mostly because of Atro.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But let's not forget, it's not just Shevik's choice. Le Guin chose for the university to be an IEO, not in Thu.
Yeah.
Le Guin chose to have Shevik come to IEO first. And I would say it's because she is publishing in and primarily for a capitalist society. So she's sort of introducing us to what is slightly more familiar to us first. Does that make sense? So I think that I think that's the rationale for why that development is as it is. And then we meet Shavoi.
Well, and also, I mean, it's the IEO is more of an analog for the West than,
yes.
And that's more familiar to us. But also, I mean, let's face it, whatever good the Soviet Union may have had in its society, the free exchange of ideas was not one of them. I mean, it was a very closed down, very authoritarian society. And that's not to say that the United States is perfect, because God knows it's not. We know all about that. And but generally speaking, if you have one of two places you want to go and you're worried about being disappeared for saying something unacceptable, you probably have more to worry about that in the USSR than you would in the United States.
Yeah, but that's
any Western democracy.
Shevik's not worried about that, because we see that he is being very judicious in what he says and who he says it to.
Well, but he's also aware that, I mean, he says it to Shavoi, like, would I even be allowed to say this in Thu? I mean, he's aware that he has more freedom in IEO. And then, but the part about this scene that really struck me was right at the end of this section when Shavoi says, "Why didn't you just give your theory to your own people?" And Shevik says, "Because they didn't want it." Oh. Like, do you think I didn't try? They didn't want it. And I suppose part of it is that they would see no use for it. It wouldn't benefit their society. But it's got a sting if you're Shevik and you're.
You think I did not try? How did he try? What did he do to try? We don't know yet, and we also know that the person that he got linked to is somebody who egoizes, who puts himself and his own work, or his own name, his own opportunities ahead of those that he works with, and everybody knows this. So, we don't know yet how he tried, and we also, and it's a smaller society. And we are reminded again and again that he is among the best minds, the brightest. He is able to see things that other people don't. And it may also have been that other people, nobody's able to understand it. So what's the point in publishing it? If you make up a language on your own and you publish a book in that language, nobody's going to buy it. Nobody, why would they? They don't understand it. It means absolutely nothing to them. And so, we just don't know enough of it. And the fact that Shevik is expressionless, bless you want to give him a hug because he's feeling bad about that.
Of course. It's his life's work, and his own people didn't have a use for it. I mean,
Yeah. And then Charles asked already, what does everybody think about why Shavoi disappears? Is it his choice, his government, or the Eodian government? Eotian. I think, remember he says that he claims to be a willing agent of his state, and a patriot. And this is when they're in some place that he feels comfortable speaking freely, that he doesn't have to say this. And also he's talking to Shevik, so he's not but at the same time, I mean, he's been telling himself this for so long that it's habituated with him. Hey, Newsbank, and Empire Jeff, yeah, it totally won the Nebula because it's an awesome book. And so I think there are different possibilities. I think it's entirely possible that, I mean, because it's not that much longer before Shavik finds out that he's been gone, and it's entirely possible that the library was bugged.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And that he's just gone.
He's just gone.
It's also entirely possible that they've just thought that he's talking too much to Shavik or whatever. I mean, there are so many different possibilities that he was just, it's just time. We have other work for you to do. This is what we need. Kind of like the 10-day thing that we have this thing for you to do. Go do this thing that your society needs you.
Right. Yeah. So, but yeah, Shafoylisk is gone, and then we have a scene of Shavik visiting Atro, and they have a conversation, and I
underlined that Atro, they had argued about or he had argued in favor of Shavik's theories.
Yeah.
And finally, but he would not have fought less for he would not have fought for less than the truth. But it was the fighting he had loved. He's just argumentative and having fun with it. And I'm just like, oh, bless you, little Joe. He just like, I can't help thinking he reminds me of Carl from Up. He's just a little grumpy old man. So he's fun.
And he's sort of a contradictory figure to Shavik, because we learn
a nice counterpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because we learned that like Atro is from a relatively well-to-do family. It says that he can trace his genealogy back for all these centuries, and it's generals, princes, great landowners, and his family still has an estate. And and yet it says to Shavik he was an enigma, because he was an aristocrat, yet he had genuine contempt for both money and power. And Shavik is like,
part of that is because it's like, it's old news to him. He takes it for granted. But he is comfortable and confident in his power and his own authority, because, as my note here says, he talks a lot. Shavik can't get a word in edgewise.
Right.
Atro's just like, he has a sense of his own importance. He's just like, and here's what I think about this, and goes on about that. And to some degree, Shavik's content just to let him talk, because they are intellectual, not just intellectual equals, but they have shared interests. And Atro is somebody that he can sort of, kind of like he did with Shafoylisk. We see that he's acclimating more to Anarchy society.
Right.
And so, yes, he has these things that are very, but also it's a learning opportunity for Shavik, because he is an aristocrat effectively. To get to know somebody in that way also is I'm sure interesting to him. And then also just the way that he's described, he tapped, the old man was serious. He tapped Shavik on the arm and, twitching his eyes and munching with his lips as he did when he was moved, said, "I hope you feel the same, my dear. I earnestly hope it." And they're talking about interplanetary brotherhood. That there's an us, and they are different. They are not us. And Shavik's just like, I don't know about this, but and that's also again why it's not just that Shavoi can't get a word in edgewise, although I don't know that he would be able to. It's also that he's like, I don't know that he necessarily agrees, but he doesn't want to disagree with Atro. So yeah. Am I supposed to Newsbank? Am I supposed to say in Minecraft? When you come to release your theory, says Atro, I earnestly hope you'll think of your duty to your own people. And of course, that makes me think back to what Shavoi said.
Right.
Give to your own people. He's talking about the Anarchy there. Shavoi means your own people on Anaris. But when Atro says it, he's talking about us. He's including himself in there, and Anaris and Eurus, and as opposed to the Hainish and the Terrans and everybody, everybody else in the galaxy.
Right. Yeah. So, they're talking because what gets them on the subject is they're talking about the word Setian, which is the term which was apparently coined by people from outside their system for the collective people of both Uras and Anarish. They're called Setians. And he's like, when you publish your theory, think about us.
Think about your own people. And I underlined that. And my note says, and just who is that? So they may not be thinking. And then so, he keeps, Shavoi put his hand on the old man's arm, reassuring, but he said nothing. Then Atro just keeps on going, keeps talking. And then he at the end of this paragraph, he says, by the way, how's it going, your book? And I underlined that, and my note says, everyone wants something.
Exactly. Have you gotten any further on that theory, bud?
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Shavoi looked at the old man with compunction and affection, but he did not tell him any more about the state of his theory.
No, because he knows he has a hot commodity.
He knows he got it.
And he's not foolish.
He knows you want it.
Yeah, exactly.
So then he goes and he visits OEA.
Yeah.
And I underlined this one. The Urasti had taste, but it seemed often to be in conflict with an impulse toward display. Which is interesting.
Yeah, and he likes this house better because it's described as a middle class house on Urasti, a modest middle class house, but it's less ostentatious than most of the other Urasti places that he has seen, and he appreciates that. It's described as grace achieved by restraint.
Yes. And I have a note here, the idea of competitive economics, the competitive economic comparison, like we talked about, keeping up with the Joneses. Yeah. And then there's also the idea that people tend to compare up. Like we tend to compare ourselves unfavorably with those in a higher wealth bracket. Like, well, we don't have this and we don't have that. More often than we do with our neighbors who are less affluent. It's just that seems to be human nature from the research that I've seen about it. One of the things that this came out is that this is the first time he's been around a woman in like a long time.
Right, because it's a very patriarchal society.
Yes, but also, so Le Guin, I think this comes after Left Hand of Darkness, in which she does some exploration of gender. And but I read that after I read this, even though I literally had that book given to me when I was in 7th grade. And I was like, I'm going to read this one day. And I kept it and I kept it and I kept it and I kept it and I kept it. And finally, after I read this the first time, I was like, okay, I'm ready. And I read it and I was like, I didn't like it as much as I like this because it's one of my favorite books. But it was really interesting to think about. Yeah, Musebank, I'm with you. I love it. I love this book so much. And mostly because I love Shavoi. I love Shevik. I want to give him a big hug. But at the same time, it's still, even in Left-Handed Darkness, it's still a binary system. There's no conceptualization of an alternative to male, female.
Right.
That's it. Even in Left-Handed Darkness, where you have people who are effectively agender, or literally asexual, and then when as their sexual cycle goes through its cycle, when they meet someone who is in a counterpart cycle, they actually develop, their body physically changes to be either male or female. Mm-hmm. So there's still a sense of sexual and gender binary here in her work. But again, it won the Nebula in 1974, so that's like really pretty advanced for its time. Yeah. Marlene got it. Will you send me cat pictures, please? Like, I don't know. Cool. I don't think we can do that in chat, but that's like awesome. And you named your kitty Shavik. Oh, like, is it how? Oh, well, we can talk. I want to talk about your cat once we get done talking about the chapter. But yeah. Oh, kitty. Yes, Charles. Atro, is thinking at the societal level, and some of that with personal possessions. Again, I would argue it's because he comes from generational wealth, as some random geek mentioned, and he just takes personal possessions just for granted. It's like it's not even thought about. It's like it would be in poor taste to bring that up. That would be, that would show that you are that you're new money. Yeah, that's gauche.
Yes, exactly. No class.
Oh my goodness. And then the kid, Mr. Shevik doesn't have very good manners. And I'm just like, oh, see, it's a title, the use of the title. It's hilarious. But of course, and he doesn't call him Dr. Shevik because he's not giving him the you're a professor title. He's giving you are a person in authority. You're a grown up, therefore you get called Mr. And it's hilarious.
Yeah. And Shevik gets to explain how things work where he's from, because the kid says he has bad manners because he didn't say thank you when he was passed the pickles. And Shevik explains, well, where I'm from, when people share things, they don't say thank you. They just share and share alike, and they don't mention it. We only say thank you if it's a gift. And because it's a meal, I assumed that you just wanted to share the pickles with me, not that you were giving them to me.
He moved. See, this is Whitmore. Okay, honey, I'm talking about the book, so I can't give you all my attention right now. Okay, so you gotta get down. There you go. Good boy. But yeah, and I also loved the Ini, be quiet. Sodic, don't egoize. The tone was exactly the same. It's like, some things are the same, that some things don't change. Oh my goodness. And then, so yeah, and the kids have that natural curiosity. Lisa, I want to come back to that. I really do want to discuss Left-Handed Darkness, but I kind of got off on a tangent, and I'm really bad about doing that. It's so hard because you guys you say some interesting things. Musebank said Ursula said she kind of regretted that.
The binary gender thing.
Yeah, but at the same time, you work with what you got, and there is in some random geek, this is for you, incremental progress is still progress. So like, yes, she could go farther, but you have to, you can't, kind of like what Shevik was saying earlier. You have to cross half the room to cross the rest of the room. You can't cross the whole room without crossing
the whole room all at once.
So there. Yeah. So yeah, and they're talking about what things are like on Anaris, and Shevik says that nobody's ever punished, but sometimes they make you go away by yourself for a while. And I wrote down, what if you refuse? And I think I don't remember if it's later directly said, but is it, da, 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 da. Yes, it is. It's a few pages later that what happens to a man who just won't cooperate. It's okay to vent, some random geek, and I love you. I love you for it, and for being so open, for being comfortable enough to do so. So good for you. He moves on. The others get tired of him. They make fun of him, or they get rough with him.
They get rough with him.
Yeah, beat him up.
So it's
violence.
So it's mob rule. That's what you're advocating. You're advocating mob rule. No laws, no government, mob rule.
Social pressure.
Mob rule.
But isn't that what democracy is?
No.
Yeah, it is.
Democracy has a rule of law and has an orderly system and has elections and a constitution.
We all agree to. And if we wanted to change it, we have a constitution that can be changed.
And one of the laws is usually that if people are being disagreeable, we don't just form a gang and take them behind a wall and beat them up. And at least if people do that, we acknowledge that it's a bad thing that people shouldn't do. I disagree.
I
think that is a very telling. I think
the phrase justifiable force is like a legal thing.
I think the ease with which Shavoi drops that little nugget of information, which is, if there is someone who is just not cooperating, well, there's other things that we can try, but also people might get rough with him. So people who are
violence is the thing. But it is, rather than being simply state sanctioned, it is socially sanctioned, which the state is a social organism. I mean, that's what a state is. The state is made up of people. It's people. It's kernels the whole way down, dude. As
Charles says in the chat, it's not criminal because there's no laws. Exactly.
No, but I would say physical assault is just fine. It's not fine. There's the sense that, should have listened. We tried to tell him. If someone does not follow the guidelines of society, there is punishment. And just because that punishment does not come from an official state, it's still sanctioned by the group as a whole. It's just more direct. The fact, so that means that they have to take responsibility for it. They don't have the comfort of blaming it on someone else. Because let's be honest, when we have a system that, kind of like what I was saying about, we have the public schools that we actually value. Same thing with cops. We have a system that allows our police officers to use excessive force and to get away with it. We have that system because of the elected officials that we choose and the laws that they support and the policies that they support. We have that system because we allow it.
Oh, I agree with you completely.
And we have but then we also get the comfort of blaming them, despite the fact that we're the ones who put them there.
I agree with you completely. But imagine a society where there is no government, where there is no state, where there are no institutions, in the way that there are no the society that Shavoi lives in, right? And there is a group of people that do basically the same things that we have problems with cops doing. But they are accountable. But it's not.
Okay, go ahead.
But they are accountable to no one because there's no one for them to be accountable to. They are
accountable to everyone.
The only way to stop them, if they refuse to listen to reason, is to meet them with even more overwhelming violence. At least, and I'm not saying the problems with police reform in our country are egregious, but at least we have options that we can explore before we start having shootouts with cops in the streets to
So
stop
do
killer cops.
they.
We can cut their funding. We can fire them. We have institutions in place that if we chose to use them, which we're not, unfortunately, but if we chose to use them, we could bring pressure to bear to stop them from doing these things that they're doing. And in a society where those institutions basically don't exist, like, I mean, they obviously don't care about the opinion of the community in the first place if they're doing what they're doing. So community pressure doesn't seem like this is one of those areas where I just think this would never work. That as disagreeable as certain aspects of having a state and having a government may be, there are times when it's just better to have one than not to have one, because otherwise you wind up with what Shevik is referring to and when he's describing that situation to the family, which is mob rule, unchecked by any kind of authority or any kind. Yes, that's what it is. If they want someone to leave town and he doesn't want to leave town, they beat him up. That's mob rule.
Unchecked by authority does not mean completely unchecked. They are checked by the same, the same community. They are just as accountable to the community as the person who is behaving disagreeably in the first place. They are accountable at the same level. It's that no one is more or less accountable than anybody else. That is why it is more egalitarian, because they all have the same expectations, the same pressures placed on them. This guy who is not behaving appropriately doesn't get extra privileges just because he's not behaving appropriately. Likewise, it's not that there is a group of people who does this. Anybody can do this. Those who choose to, and they also, if they use, if others determine that their violence went too far, they also face the consequences of their actions. There is no institution or system in place that will protect them. So they have to take that into account in their use of force. Force is always an option. You have to be aware of what the consequences of your actions are, and these people are. Now, the other thing that I'm going to come at this with is tenure. And as now, where I am in Georgia, we don't actually have tenure that truly protects us. You can still be let go. But thanks to the existence of actual tenure in other states, there is the expectation that if your contract is non-renewed, that there should be cause, and you can fight that if you choose to. However, if your school doesn't really want you to stick around, they can apply social pressure, and there's nothing that they can change your teaching assignment to something that you've never taught before, which makes it a lot more stressful, a lot more difficult. They can give you multiple preps. They can, I think, if you can prove that you're given students who have more, you are given more students who have a history of behavior problems. If you could prove that, you could sue the heck out of them. But there are other things that they can do to make things difficult for you and to let you know that you're not wanted, just like they do. People get nudged out,
right,
in systems where there is a system of tenure in place, and you can't, not that you can't, but you would have to be, you would have to be documented as being a bad teacher in order to be removed. They would have to prove that you should be fired, which I think is a good thing.
I agree. But one thing they can't do legally is round up some people and drag you out somewhere and kick the shit out of you, which is what Shevik is describing people do if all else fails. That's mob rule.
And there's consequences if they choose to do that.
What consequences? What consequences? He doesn't mention consequences. What happens to the mob? Does a bigger mob form and kick the shit out of the mob?
We don't know.
And how is this better? How is this better than the system that we have in place currently?
Because you can't pawn your decisions off on somebody else.
It's just
we are responsible. You and I personally are responsible for the violence that goes on, that is perpetuated by our elected and appointed officials.
I agree. I don't disagree with that at all.
Okay, but so what are you doing about it?
I'm working within the system that we have. I'm trying to
They're working within the system that they have.
They don't have a system. They have mob rule. They don't have a system.
They do have a system. It's social pressure, which, yes, you can call it mob rule, but it's not. I mean,
that's what it is. That's what it is.
No.
Yes.
No, he doesn't talk about gangs regularly going out. He's talking about, if
I'm not saying that it happens regularly.
I'm not used to that. I'm used to it being the other way around.
I'm not saying, well, this is an instance where I feel like the society that Shavik is coming from is, I mean, there are parts of it that I think are nice in theory. I don't think they would work in the real world. I think it's a fairy tale, but I think they're nice in theory, and I can see the attraction to it. But the idea that, well, if they're, it's community pressure, and it's people naturally just tend to sort of do what is best for the community and for the society because we're all in this together. That's great. What if someone doesn't want to play ball? Well, they use certain sort of social pressures to try and nudge them, to do the right thing or to push them out if they need to. And what if that fails? Oh, well, then they kick the shit out of them. And guess what? If they hang him, if they have a lynching, nobody's going to fucking stop them. And it's not even a given that they'll face any kind of retribution for that because there's no law.
So you
what if
you think that humans are only moral because of the existence of law?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
That is
but
what you're
I
saying.
do think
Then they would just go out and lynch people just because they don't like them. That's what you're proposing.
No, that's not. No, I'm saying the law is an outgrowth, or at least in its best form. The law is an outgrowth of our morality.
In its best form.
The law, in theory, the utility of the law is that it is an outgrowth of our morality, and that it is rooted in our desire to have not just an orderly society, but a fair society. And I would argue that any society where a group of people could just get together and kick the shit out of someone they don't like and not necessarily face any retribution for that or any justice for that is not a society in which I would want to live. That is a society where whether it happens to work this way or not, there would always be the potential for the people with the most power, the people with the most resources, the people with the biggest guns, whatever, would be the people in charge. And unlike our society, as flawed and imperfect and in desperate need of reform as it is, there would be no recourse to overthrow that authority or to change that authority or appeal to that authority, except to go out and get even bigger guns. And I just don't see why that is at all an improvement on the society that we have. And I also don't see how it's distinguishable from mob rule. And you can intellectualize it all you want and talk all you want about, how everybody would take care of themselves, everybody would take care of each other, and everybody would, we would all be in this together, and social pressure would it almost sounds like you're describing a society that would just automatically just kind of regulate itself. And I just don't see anything in human history to suggest that would happen, except in very, very small, isolated communities, which is no longer really an option, in case you haven't noticed.
And I think that's one of the places where this story is a story, because they have a small community. It's
an Irish,
it's not teensy tiny, but it's small enough that that social pressure becomes much more significant. And it's also, keep in mind that they don't have big guns. They don't have them. and they all exist within this same society. So all people face consequences for their actions. You're assuming that, everybody else is okay with this mob. And if you have somebody whose actions are so vile that the entire society wants them dead, then you really need, either you think that this person really didn't deserve to die, and the humanity as a whole is just that bad, in which case I kind of think that the society would have imploded before then.
Right.
Or you acknowledge, essentially you're looking at legally sanctioned violence, which, our penal system is, or you're looking at socially sanctioned violence, which is what Shavoi describes. And if the violence is determined by the surrounding community to be excessive, then yes, there are further consequences. Because, what happens to somebody who won't cooperate? Those are people, if they use excessive force, they're not cooperating. If the other people in their society feel like that force was excessive, then yeah, they're going to make these people feel uncomfortable and unwelcome, starting with, whatever response they feel is appropriate, they're allowed to use. But they also have to be aware that other people are going to have feelings and respond to their actions. Arguably, like you said, the law reveals what we truly value. You said, in its best form, it specifies what our morality is, our morals. Right. But I would argue that in its actual form, it reveals what our morality actually is. Well, so do our actions.
Well, no, I agree with you. And look, I agree with what you're saying.
Essentially, rule of law is mob rule put in writing.
I guess a little simplistic. I think that's a little simplistic. Yeah. So anyway, let's
okay.
Let's finish talking about the chapter.
So yeah, Lisa, I definitely think that there is a history of mob violence, and that does cause a problem. What causes a greater problem is when it is then when there is no recourse, when everybody agrees that this is okay. That's the problem. When everybody agrees that one class of people deserves fewer opportunities and has no recourse in a system of law, and you don't actually use that system of law, that's the problem. When there is when what we say, when what the law says does not match up with what actually happens, that is that's a problem. But and then when you don't have the system of law, what you do shows what you value. And that's what Shavoi's saying there. So let's see. And then they have animals.
Yeah. Well, and they have animals, and then they also talk. This was something that I wanted to make sure we mentioned this.
Thank you, Joe McClory.
I wanted to well, Joe, but if they're beating the shit out of people who displease them, then that's mob rule. But Shavoi says they talk about how their society works, and this is where they get into the idea of, well, for the people, they say who does the shit jobs, and he says, well, we all take turns doing that, and that those are the sorts of things that you might have to do one day per decade, and one of the people at the dinner asked, well, but why would anybody volunteer for that? And Shavoi says, well, because basically he says, well, it's a change of pace. It's a change of pace. And the way that, and so people who do another job 9 days of the week might want to go out and dig a ditch or, lay some track or lay some pipe or whatever, because they find it pleasurable to do something different. And I thought this gives us an insight into why he he lacks such motivation, that and why he thinks Uras isn't real, why it doesn't seem real to him, because on Anarish he's used to working and to contributing to the society in a very physical way, and he's not asked to do that on Uras. So it feels like he's not actually connected to it. It feels like he's like it's more illusory to him. I feel like that this scene sort of explains that, or gives us some insight into why he feels that way.
We also get some more mention of Tokvar.
Yes. With the animals, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because he wondered earlier what she would think of I think they saw a donkey, and it made him think of and I think, do we know what Tokvar's job is?
I don't remember.
Do we know what Rulag's job was?
Oh, I know was it? I know because there was the bit about when she was transferred to a different place by Emerlian in the chat says she was a biologist.
Wait, who was a biologist? Which one?
I guess Rulag, or maybe Takfur. I don't know.
I don't know, because
Emerlian, who was a biologist,
it's hard to remember what we established and what I'm remembering from previous my previous read through, because I think Tokvar actually works with like teeny tiny crustaceans.
Okay, so then that makes sense that the animals would remind him of her.
Right, but I think I just spoiled that for you.
Okay,
sorry.
well, and Cardinal Doomsday says Rulag was an engineer, so.
Okay, so yeah, it's Tokvar. So and that makes sense that he's like, oh, these are like not like us, but these are higher life forms and they're animals, and like she would think this was so cool.
Yeah.
You'd like, yeah. And just the way she phrases it, he did not think consciously of Tokvar at such moments. He did not think of her absence. Rather, it was as if she were there, although he wasn't thinking about her. And so, I liked that. And then also, it was as if the beauty and strangeness of the beasts and plants of Uras had been charged with a message for him by Tokvar. And I'm like, okay, what was the message? So that was one where I'm like, this sounds nice, but I'm not entirely sure what she means. So I don't know. And that was, and then he has a dream.
He has a dream.
But I didn't take any notes on that.
Well, but I thought it was interesting. It's the second chapter that has ended, because we haven't ended on a dream before, but there's that earlier chapter where it ends with it's him sort of contemplating, like holding the moon, which is where he's from, in his hand.
Yeah.
So it's the second chapter that ends on kind of a striking visual image, because the dream is that he and Takfur are walking in the snow, and they're walking towards something like a barrier in the snow, and Shevik was afraid to approach it, but then he said to Takfur, "We'll be there soon," and then it ends with she did not answer him. So I don't know, it sounds like a little bit of an anxiety dream, like he's afraid to approach it, but he's also saying we'll be there soon, yeah.
Steve, have we I don't think we've met Tokvar and Sadek. We've had reference to them.
I don't think they've actually appeared yet, no.
So yeah
Interesting.
And maybe we'll get to meet them in chapter 6.
Maybe you who've read it already.
Well, yeah, but I don't know which chapter what happens in. I don't have it memorized.
Well, because you listen to an audiobook, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, but also, I mean, it's been a while since I read it, and we're not quite halfway through yet. It's been a while since I've read it, and also, yeah, and also with the back and forth, it's hard to remember. Well, but I mean, Cardinal Doomsday says Sonic hasn't been born yet, but yes, obviously Sonic has been born by the time that Shevik's on Urish. So the flipping back and forth gets a little bit confusing. So,
Yeah. So yeah, but I thought it was another good chapter. I really loved the. It was very packed with exposition, but in a way that was very interesting. It wasn't like, here's some backstory on the way the politics work in these countries. It was very,
yeah, I
it
mean,
was
with the
given to
kids,
us.
I mean, that was definitely expository dialogue.
Yeah, but it was a really good scene. Like that final scene. Well, I guess the dream is the final scene, but the scene of them at dinner there at Oye's house, um, it's a really good scene.
Yeah.
And like there was a little detail there that I don't think we mentioned of when he was. It says when Shevik was talking. He's talking primarily to the kids, but the parents are listening too. And it says he stayed out of ethical mode
Yeah.
because he wasn't there to propagandize the children. And I thought that was really interesting, and nice that he's aware that on this in this place that is very different from where he comes from, that he has that mode, and
Yes.
but also that there is a time and a place for that. That
Yes.
he's not here to, as it says he's not here to propagandize the children. He's a guest in their house and he's here to enjoy their company. And there's one thing that it says he talks about certain things where he says, unfortunately, like he couldn't help but propagandize in this particular way, but he's not trying to
Yes. It's not.
turn
It's
these
not
kids against their
subjective.
society. Yeah.
That would be rude.
So yeah. So I mean, any final thoughts about the chapter?
I think you're going overboard in referring to referring to the use of that you're I think you are making a false distinction in the use of physical force
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to social pressure. It's a continuum. They are the same thing.
Okay. I mean, I think you and
I
pretty much
wasn't.
every. Okay, go ahead. I apologize.
I do think that the rule of law can establish procedures that that establish an expectation that the majority should not always rule. The phrase is the tyranny of the majority.
Right.
And you have issues with that even in a simple direct democracy. And that people who are outsiders should have rights that need to be acknowledged and protected. And as Musebank points out, should elitist rule better than mob rule? And I would argue there's that oversimplifies it as well. But let's be completely honest. Ostracism is violence. It's social violence. It's not physical violence. But I mean, the purpose is to make someone uncomfortable and unhappy. It serves the same purpose as punching them in the face. It's just less obvious and overt. It's the same thing in a different form. And it's important to, I feel it's important to acknowledge that.
Again, I don't really disagree about that either.
And the rule of law does nothing about that. Nothing whatsoever.
No, but given
it offers defined consequences for behavior that steps outside the boundaries, which is kind of convenient, but also problematic in that it allows someone with wealth and power and who has the resources to deal with those consequences to go, okay. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And
again,
that's
agree.
why I would suggest that this is more effective, because everyone must face the consequence of their actions. If a mob if their actions go beyond what is necessary to deal with a problem, then there are going to be other people who say, what the heck is wrong with you? Why did you beat that guy up? And they're like, well, I didn't like the way you looked at me. Well, you're assuming that everybody else is going to be okay with that. And I don't think that anything that Shavoi said supports that. So, but you now, and as an example in our, rule of law society, friggin' speed limits. You get caught, you get pulled over, you get a ticket, you pay the ticket. Oh, well, it's the fast tax, you guys. That's what it is. Let's be honest. But, that's not what we call it. But that's what it is. It's the money you pay to go faster than everybody else gets to if they can't afford the payment.
I guess my problem with it is a lot of what you're describing, like, it sounds very similar to what right-wing libertarians say in their anti-government cases, which is, if the government would just leave people alone, then we would spontaneously organize into this ideal society. And I think it's horseshit when they say it. And I think it's horseshit when people on the left say it. Well, I just don't think that would work.
It's not. The whole point of this was that it was not spontaneously organized. Like, it was really carefully planned. Although, and they faced problems because it was planned for, like, living on the planet. Like, that's what the plan was. They got the opportunity to put it into action, but in a different setting, and that created some challenges for them. So it didn't happen spontaneously. Like, it literally didn't. I think that's something that we agree on. That just saying, yes, revolution, and then it'll be better. Not necessarily. You have to have a strategy. Without an exit strategy, you're screwed. So
we do agree on that. And like I've told you before in private, like, of all the anarchists that I know that I've talked to about this, you are by far the most reasonable. Like, it's not even close. I can't even think of another.
I love the most reasonable. You're not going to say that
because fundamentally, I think we disagree with what the goal should be. We disagree with how viable a stateless society is. I think it's not viable. I certainly don't think it's sustainable in the long term, because I think ultimately what would happen is there would be an unequal distribution of power eventually, and the people with more power would just take over. And then you would over time, you would probably wind up with a de facto state, whether you called it that or not. I mean, that's just the way it would work. And then we'd be right back in the situation that we were before,
That's one of the challenges that I think, you have to, and that's what we see on Anarchism. They're very vigilant about maintaining their statelessness.
Yeah.
That because it is something that they and again, they are all descendants of people who have chosen to be there. They are all people who have been brought up and had these values deliberately instilled in them. From the previous generation and through their parenting and their teaching and, everything in their upbringing is, they are effectively, let's say, brainwashed even. So all of the people that they opted in, and that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing. Everybody knew that they were going to be making sacrifices and that they might not freaking survive.
Right.
And they were willing to do that. And they were willing to take the risk that they would not be able to survive on the moon. I think they knew, because we saw that it had been a mining colony previously.
It was possible to survive there. Yeah. It would just be very, very rough, very difficult.
Very, very rough. And also, like, if they couldn't make it work, they would die. They would die off. And that, I mean, it demonstrates, they're like I said, they're opting in. Mm. They're demonstrating commitment. There's an investment there. And so there are a certain kind of people with certain values and certain presumably skills that will come in, that will be able to be used there. So they had that sort of structure. They didn't have the structure of law, but they had the structure of shared values, which functions in a similar way. And so even the people, I mean, you're talking about beating the shit out of someone, and that's not what Shavoi says. That's
yes, it is. Don't get rough with him.
They'll get rough with him. That getting rough with someone, it does not. I don't equate it. I would say shoving someone up against a wall counts as getting rough with them.
Okay.
I would say that does not count as beating the shit out of them. I think there's a difference. Like I said earlier, there's a spectrum. Use of social pressure against someone to make them uncomfortable, to make them feel unwelcome. That is violence. I think that's lower on the spectrum. And generally, it's considered to be more acceptable, despite the fact that it's still violence. Let's be honest.
And I, just to be clear, I have no problem with that being employed as a tactic against, I'm not against using social pressure. I'm not even against using violence if the situation calls for it. I'm against having a society where that's just the way you handle problems, where there is no recourse other than to do that if the social pressure, et cetera, doesn't work. Some random geek earlier mentioned, what about like punching Nazis or punching fascists? I have no problem at all with people punching fascists. I have a problem with a society where the only way to handle fascists is to beat the shit out of them. Where there is no law, there is no rule of law, there is no democracy, there is no government, there are no institutions that can be used to stand between those people and the people they intend to harm, where your only option is to meet force with greater force. I have a problem with that kind of a society.
That's literally not what Shavoi says. That is not the only option. That is not the only option. There are no institutions, but that doesn't mean that's the only action that can be taken. It just doesn't.
It's not the only action that can be taken, but there's no government. There's
So what? You still have people acting together. Just because they're not just because they don't wear like a little patch on their shirt to make it official. Like, just because they don't have something written down just because they're not institutionalized does not mean that they're not people working together. It's the same situation. You have people who have an agreed upon set of values. Somebody who steps outside of those set of values faces negative consequences. Same situation, except they don't have the comfort of an institution in between them that's going to take care of it for them. They have to do the work themselves.
But it's not just comfort. There are advantages to having an institution empowered by and accountable to the people, for certain. But there are advantages to having an institution that is empowered to do that work. It's nice that you think it's more honest and it's more, we have to take responsibility for ourselves to do this ourselves. That's great. There are times when it just doesn't make sense to do that. There are times when it makes more sense to have an institution, to have an agency that is empowered to do certain things. And I think that's probably why That's probably why we invented these institutions to begin with.
Such as what?
Such as delivering the mail, such as building roads, such as educating people, such as conducting any
educated on Anarchism.
such as conducting any manner of bureaucratic or administrative duty. That
they have those, and it's just not run by the state. It is organized, and they're very careful because they realize that sort of organization can lead to hierarchy. I mean, like they described that in the book. Like, they have those things. It doesn't preclude having those things. But no, they don't have a legislated judicial system. You're talking about two different things. And I'm specifically saying, what are the situations that presumably, as you're talking about, our judicial system that make that
judicial system is another example. Absolutely. Judicial system is a great example
of
who resolves disputes, who resolves disputes, who is empowered with the authority to resolve a dispute between two parties that cannot reach an agreement.
I think we see that the parties have to reach some form of agreement on their own. You got to figure it out.
That's ridiculous. But what about instances where that doesn't happen? What about instances where some kind of third-party arbitration empowered with the authority to enforce the decision to end the impasse are necessary?
So in what situation would that be necessary?
we both claim rights to the same object. I have a TV, you say it's your TV. Who gets the TV? And we can't decide, for the sake of argument. I'm sure we're reasonable people, we could work it out, but for the sake of argument, we cannot agree between the two of us who gets the TV. So who decides gets the TV in a society where there are no courts, where there is no such thing as a judge empowered by law to decide who gets the TV.
And we can't work it out.
No, we can't work it out. That's why courts exist, because sometimes people can't work shit out. Well, and I think it's breathtakingly naive that you would argue that these situations don't exist and that they aren't common enough that it would necessitate the creation of just such an institution. And I'm not saying that the institution can't be corrupted, because obviously it can be. And I'm not saying that it would ever be perfect, but to pretend that it just wouldn't be necessary, I think is ridiculous.
I think you're wrong.
I know, but.
So in the case of the television, there are other, I would say it would make more sense, because presumably I'm wondering where the TV is. If it's in your house,
you're missing the point. You're missing the point. The point, the TV is just the TV is just an example. The point is there is an.
That's what I asked for.
The point is there. The point, whatever it, whether it's no matter what it is, whether it's
actually support your point.
No matter what the specific point of contention is, the specific point of contention doesn't matter. What matters is
it does.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It doesn't because these. It doesn't. It doesn't because these conflicts exist. Listen to me.
I was trying to listen to you, and I'd like you to listen to me. I waited, Steve.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I waited.
I know. Okay? I know exactly.
I waited until you stopped talking, and then I started talking, and then you started talking. Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, so there is no single issue that is not related to other issues. So in the case of the TV, where is it? Like, is this in a shared residence?
Okay, you are missing the point of the argument. The TV.
The point of the argument was I asked for an example in which case externally enforced arbitration would be necessary.
And
of the TV.
and my example, using the TV as a specific example, but
Yes,
my
which is what I
general
asked for.
my general point is a conflict between two parties that cannot be resolved between those two parties. And your
I'm saying
answer,
such
and
things don't exist.
yes, your answer is that such things don't exist, and I think that's horseshit. Such things
Okay,
do
that's great.
exist.
Which is why I said, if such things do exist, give me a specific example. You
I
gave
don't know. No matter what I give you, you're just going to I cannot believe you're seriously trying to argue that there is no such thing as as a conflict between two people that cannot be resolved, or two parties. Lisa in the chat brings up has an example. What if there are two parties that both want to control a particular site that they each think is holy? Who decides who gets the land? If they both think if they both think it's holy. And you don't have there are no courts, there is no law, there is no government, there's no body empowered to decide who gets the land and who has to move elsewhere. So what happens? So the truth is, whoever can kill most of the people on the other side gets the land. The truth is, the only way to resolve it is by violence.
And that's what we see in our state societies now. I mean, sometimes the only way to resolve a dispute is with physical force.
But if you have an institution in your society empowered to make these decisions, then it doesn't always have to get to the point of actual physical force.
And even if you don't have an institution in your society that is empowered to make those decisions, as we saw from what Shavoi said, it doesn't always have to get to the point of using physical force. Sometimes with an institution that is empowered to make decisions, when that institution makes decisions that the greater community does not like, the result is the use of physical force that is created because of this institution going outside the bounds of what the society actually thinks is appropriate. The institution results in increased violence.
Well, look, as I said, I don't deny that the institution itself is imperfect, and that there are problems created by the institution. You know, and I'll even go so far
I think that's what it comes down to. Does the institution create more problems than it solves? And I would say yes.
Okay, and I would say no. And not only that, I would even argue further and say that I feel like the development of institutions like this in some form is inevitable. Because whether you can say, you can argue all you want that there's no such thing as an irreconcilable conflict, but the truth is, and you can disagree with this, I think you do, apparently, there will always be the potential that there will be conflicts between two parties who just cannot or will not reach a compromise. And eventually, if that happens enough times in a society as anarchistic as they want to say they are, eventually, if that happens enough times, that society will create an institution like a court, whatever they want to call it. They can make up a name for it so they can pretend that they're still anarchists and it doesn't have any real authority, just like the bullshit, well, the teacher's not really in charge of the classroom from the earlier chapter. They will empower that institution to resolve those conflicts, because it will just be fucking easier for everybody that way. And it will work better. It will be more efficient. And I feel like that kind of thing it's just going to happen anyway. You know? And some random geek, I'm sorry, yes, anarchism is bullshit. I'm sorry. That's how I feel. I don't think that's a revelation. I mean, that's my opinion. Is it all that it's unworkable, that it is not a viable system?
You've gotten used to hearing me say this, but I think your opinion is wrong.
I respect that. I respect that you think that. I believe you, but I mean,
because time is a factor, and you may not be able to reach a decision that everybody is happy with. Consensus is not always possible, But it comes down to, you know, kind of like what you said, what you're willing to do about it. It comes down to action rather than result, you know, rather than letting someone else decide. And if, you know, I think to take your example and move it to something that makes more sense in the context of the book, if there's a shared residence, like a dorm, and there's one TV, and we can't all use it at the same time, then it comes down to, you know, habituated behaviors and social pressure. You know, if one person always got the remote, then other people are going to ask for the remote. And if that person is egoizing in Le Guin's language and is always in command of the remote, then other people are not going to agree with that. And if that person doesn't want to, when is asked to hand over the remote and doesn't want to, and explains, no, I want to watch this show, and another person is not able to work that out, there is the expectation that they will work things out, preferably without violence. And someone who is never, who is, I won't even say never, but who is regularly unwilling to make not compromises, but concessions. And I think that distinction is important.
I agree.
That someone who is not always, but even just regularly unwilling to make concessions is going to face negative social consequences. And it comes down to that person choosing how to respond. Is always getting to watch his show important enough, more important than the, not status exactly, but the community experience, the kinship with others that he loses as a result? And that is not something that he has to work out with anyone else. That is something he has to decide for himself. It is a conflict with others, but the resolution, the way that conflict is not necessarily resolved, but the way that conflict is handled is based on the decisions made by individuals. That makes sense in my head, but I think
it makes sense
as I say it.
I think I get where I can follow you.
And someone else beating the shit out of him, as you put it, to take the remote from him by force, I tend to think would be seen as a greater breach of the societal expectations. That would, you know, does that also seem fair?
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
So I guess, and I hadn't really thought that through before, but it's not necessarily about reaching consensus or reaching an agreement. It's about reaching a decision about what you're going to do about it. And that's what I like about that. It's that it forces it back on personal responsibility and accountability. And like I tell my students, it's about owning your choices.
Yeah.
And being, and one of the things that does make it more challenging is that, you know, with rule of law, theoretically, it doesn't always, in fact, I would argue it usually doesn't. That's why we have lawyers. You have consequences that are spelled out. And in this system, you don't. You don't always know what you have sort of a general idea that, you know, if you're always hogging the remote, you're not going to get the shit beat out of you for it. You know, right. just from general practice, because you've never seen that happen. So just your own experience is what you're going on. but there's some tension, I would think, and some anxiety, and not necessarily knowing what those consequences are because it's not spelled out. Kind of like we saw with the students who get tense when they're like, but we like having spelled out expectations. Thank you very much.
Right.
It is nice to have that to fall back on, to know what the expectations are, to have that spelled out, what the consequences will be. It's nice having that, even if it doesn't always follow through, even if the grades, ultimately, let's be honest, grading is subjective. Deciding what's on the test, that's subjective. You can put a number on that sucker, or you can make a test multiple choice and pretend it's objective. It's not objective. Choosing which questions are on the test, choosing how those questions are worded, choosing what options they have as their answers. That's all that. All of that is a teacher decision. It's all subjective.
Right.
It just gives the illusion of objectivity, but the illusion of that objectivity is very, very comforting. And you know what? That's not nothing. That comfort is not nothing. I'm willing to grant that. But it's not true. And I prioritize truth over comfort.
Well, that's nice. I mean,
hey, thank you for being so patient, because I went on there for quite a bit, and I appreciate that.
Oh,
I just want to
that's, I'm sorry for talking over you. But, you mentioned, I don't think it's just a matter of comfort. I do think that's part of it, but I don't think it's just a matter of comfort. I think that if I think there are advantages to having certain things codified, especially if we're talking about, broad societal expectations. And when we codify those things, we call them laws. And I don't see why it's better to have a society without codified laws than to have a society with codified laws. Part of it is knowing what the expectations are, knowing what the limitations are, knowing what your rights are, knowing how far you can go, when you have to stop, knowing what the consequences will be if you violate those boundaries, defining who has what power in society and limiting that power, and creating and defining a device for making alterations to these things that we've codified. I don't, yes, it can be abused, and yes, it can be used for the purpose of oppression, and it can be put at the service of inequality, as we've seen throughout human history pretty regularly. But I don't think that an anarchist society would escape those problems. And I think that there are certain advantages to having a system where there are nonviolent mechanisms, not just through social pressure, but that are built in and defined and institutionalized, so that we know how they work, we know what to expect, we know what, if this happens, we can do this. And I would much prefer to live in a society like that than to live in a society like I think most anarchists want to live in. And I don't think that I don't question their motivations. I think they want a society that is equal and that is free and that is without poverty and that is without inequality and oppression. And I think that's admirable, but I just don't think that's the way to go about it.
I think it would be nice to live in a society without poverty, but as we see in the description of Anaris, they pretty much live in what we would consider poverty. And yeah. I would prioritize the equity that they have over prosperity. I understand that they have a hard life, but that has a lot of value to me. Kyle Headley says, "How do you avoid domination by a majority? How are people free to make new decisions?" And Steve, you sort of touched on this. There is a great conversation between Shevik and Tokver. It's my favorite part of the book, and it's coming. It's later. We haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh boy!
And where they talk about that, and I'm also Muse you saying ours is a harsh moon, but I mean. Obviously it's more habitable than ours currently is. So I mean, harsh, harsh is relative. I mean, it's possible, it's possible. And so I do, Kyle, I saw your question there. Thank you so much. And I think that makes a nice transition into my looking up and seeing that it's 9 o'clock.
Yes, we've been going for 3 hours. So yeah, do you have any?
Charles Chapman said that he's glad that even as we're getting kind of heated, we're recognizing that we're stepping over each other. And Steve, I've really enjoyed this conversation so much.
So have I.
I can tell that you're having fun too, and but I'm realizing that I'm remembering that I think it was on one of the Trek Reluctantly videos, people were like, yeah, some of these 4-hour ones, and I'm like, we're at 3 now, and we could easily go for another hour or two.
The nice the nice thing is, because you mentioned earlier, we're not even halfway through the book yet.
Yeah.
So
there's lots more.
We'll probably have some version of this argument at least 2 or 3 more times before we're done.
Yeah. I don't know. So I'm some random geek has already, thank you so much, put in a link to my YouTube channel, and my goal right now is to get up to 100 subscribers so that I can actually give it a poor little URL. It makes sense. It's not like letters. It's just like some of them are uppercase and some of them are lowercase, and maybe there's a number in there or something. I don't know, but I really would like to have like a name for my channel. And I do want to let you guys know that if you've enjoyed this book talk, I have a video of a book talk going up tomorrow. And the nice thing about it is it's a whole lot shorter. Now the unfortunate part of it is Steve's not in it. So there's no Steve.
You can judge for yourself whether that's unfortunate or not.
But he edits my videos for me because I can't stand to watch them. No. I'm working on it though. I have iMovie and I'm working on the point to where I can watch the video. It's hard.
Actually, I'm going to do this as soon as we get off the air here in a minute. I'm just going to add a link to your YouTube channel in the description for our live streams together, so people have an easy way to get to it. But yeah, so anybody watching this who has not checked out Dana's channel, I'll right after this is over, I'll put it in the description of this video and I'll add it to our live streams from now on. And it was posted in the chat earlier. And
I would also, since we this is the chapter where he goes shopping, I would suggest including like if you can to the Stuff Mart rap song.
Yeah, of course.
It's so funny and it's so good.
Of course. But but seriously, if anybody watching has not subscribe to Dana's channel, please do so, because you will not regret it. She does videos, she does teaching videos, which are awesome, about like basic concepts of grammar, which, is you can see what a great teacher she is just through those videos. And she does videos about literature and books and, different sort of concepts that she's, and as you can tell from watching her on this live stream and my other stuff, I
get very excited about things.
Yeah, well, and you're smart and you're brilliant and you're incredibly easy and fun to watch. And really, it's just you're amazing and you're wonderful, and everybody should subscribe and watch your videos because they're great. And as I've mentioned,
very well edited,
very impeccably edited, absolutely impeccably edited. So please, everybody, go subscribe to Dana's channel so she can get that sweet custom URL.
That would be great. And also, I will tell you, I'm a sucker. Oh, I'm such a sucker for comments, and I love talking about I mean, as you can tell, I mean, I love talking about ideas, and especially about teaching. Oh my goodness gracious, you can get me going. And so yeah, and also, Steve, you have lots of content coming up next week. Do you have your first interview of the new year?
My first, yes, the conversation stream comes back on Monday, and it will be, my guest will be Caitlin Burns. And I'm gonna have to get together with Caitlin over the weekend and decide what we're going to talk about, because we haven't actually decided what our subject will be. But yeah, she will be my guest on Monday, and then of course next week, Dana, you and I will be back for Trek Reluctantly, where we will be watching
the next episode of
the
Firefly.
next episode of Firefly.
Shindig.
Shindig.
It's Shindig. I'm like, I'm and it's on Wednesday. It's on Wednesday. It's perfect. Shindig. I'm gonna try to remember to wear something pink, because if anybody in the chat is aware of this is Shindig with the pink dress. You guys, the pink dress. Oh, I'm so excited.
I can hardly wait to find out what the hell you're talking about.
No idea what I'm talking about. It's great.
and then I'll be back a week from tonight with the first Ask Away of the year, so that'll be fun. And I also have a scripted video going up on next Wednesday.
What's it about, Steve?
Well, as you know, because we've talked about it today. It'll be the next video in my Where Do We Go From Here series, and it will be about prisons, the problem with prisons. Prison reform, prison abolition, prison felon enfranchisement, a little bit of the history of prisons in the United States and mass incarceration, and why that has become such a shit show that we desperately need to address in a really, really serious way. So yeah, that'll be on Wednesday. So that'll be the scripted video on Wednesday, and then of course Wednesday night will be Trek Reluctantly and Shindig. So there we go.
Thanks so much for sticking around for a very long conversation, and thank you all so much for your contributions.
Absolutely,
I've loved it so much, and we couldn't talk to everybody, and I know we missed some points, but just thank you all guys so much for being so wonderful. Loved it.
Absolutely, and Happy New Year, everybody.
So far, it's been happy. It's been
so far. One day, it's been pretty good. We'll see. Hopefully it holds.
Don't lose that momentum.
Exactly. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.